Welcome back to Background Historian. In this series, we drift gently through the life of Pope Urban II, from his quiet beginnings as Odo of Chatillon to his rise as one of medieval Europe's most influential spiritual leaders. Together, we explore the peaceful monasteries that shaped his character, the calm discipline of his early service, the soft but steady steps toward the papacy, and the thoughtful leadership that defined his reign. Each part is designed to guide you into rest, offering a soothing journey through history where the details unfold slowly, the tone remains gentle, and the past becomes a quiet companion as you fall asleep. Part 1. A quiet beginning, the early world of Odo of Chatillon. Long before he became Pope Urban II, before the councils and sermons, before the tides of history carried his name into chronicles and distant memories, he lived a quieter life as a young man named Odo. His world was not yet filled with the responsibilities of guiding Christendom or responding to the complex pressures of medieval politics. Instead, it was a world shaped by soft countryside air, the gentle rhythm of monastic study, and the subtle internal awakening of a mind intent on understanding faith, morality, and the structure of a world held together by divine and earthly order. Tonight, we begin with this early world, the calm foundation before the storm of history that would follow. We imagine the boy Odo in the rural landscapes of France, walking along quiet paths lined with fields and forests, exploring the early stirrings of curiosity that would guide him into the cloister. The tone of this chapter remains slow, contemplative, and soothing, following the pattern of your previous series. Settle into a comfortable position, breathe steadily, and allow this gentle journey into medieval France to unfold. The land of his birth, rural France in the mid-11th century. Odo of Chatillon was born around the year 1042, during a century defined more by gradual change than sudden transformation. The region of Champagne, where he likely spent his earliest years, offered a soft landscape of rolling hills, small villages, church steeples rising above rooftops, and forests that stretched in calm patterns across the horizon. The countryside breathed with slow rhythms. Farmers tending fields in the early hours. Shepherds guiding their flocks to pastures. Small streams reflecting morning light. Bells from local churches calling villagers to prayer. Marketplaces forming and dispersing with predictable regularity. For a child growing up in this environment, the world felt stable, grounded, and gently structured. Odo would have been surrounded by an atmosphere in which faith was not simply a personal practice, but a shared rhythm of daily life. Villagers marked their days through simple devotions. Priests served as both spiritual leaders and sources of community guidance. Seasonal festivals tied communities together through shared meals and music. These early impressions shaped Odo's sense of belonging in a world where faith and society intertwined naturally. A family of modest nobility. Though not of great wealth or royal status, Odo's family held enough influence to provide him with opportunities for education. His early home would have been a modest manor or fortified house with stone walls, small gardens, and a view of surrounding farmland. The daily sounds included the movement of servants, the creak of wooden carts, and the calm hum of work unfolding in the courtyard. Even in childhood, Odo likely sensed the difference between the structured order of his household and the broader world of the peasantry beyond its gates. This awareness encouraged a sense of responsibility. Nobility, even modest nobility, carried expectations. Learning to read Latin. Understanding the customs of the church. Developing good judgment. Practicing restraint and courtesy. These early moral lessons would later influence his decisions as a church leader. Early education, a gentle introduction to books and prayer. As a boy, Odo was sent to a nearby church school or monastic center where he learned the fundamentals of Latin grammar, scripture, and basic theology. Medieval education was slow and repetitive, designed to root learning deeply into the memory. His early studies included reciting psalms, copying simple texts, listening to stories of saints, learning the structure of the Mass, understanding the moral lessons of Scripture. These lessons were delivered not in haste, but in a quiet environment where time seemed to stretch gently. Imagine young Odo in a small room lit by a narrow window. The light falls softly across a wooden table where he traces letters on parchment with deliberate care. Monks speak in quiet voices, guiding him patiently through lines of text. Outside, the sound of distant bells marks each hour, grounding the boy in the deeper rhythm of monastic life. The pull toward monasticism, a quiet calling. As Odo grew older, he felt an increasing draw toward the cloistered world of monks. The monastic life offered silence, contemplation, disciplined study, communal prayer, stability amid the shifting world. These qualities suited his temperament. He was not a warrior like many noble sons. He did not seek wealth or lands. Instead, he sensed a desire to understand the foundations of faith, the moral questions that shaped human life, and the responsibilities of spiritual leadership. This sense of calling emerged slowly. It was not a single moment of transformation, but a gradual unfolding, like the opening of a flower in morning light. Odo felt peace in the presence of monks. He admired their clarity. He saw how carefully they organized their days. He sensed that their lives were dedicated not to worldly ambition, but to something deeper and more enduring. In these early years, the seed of his future papacy quietly took root. Life in the monastery, the calm foundation of his faith. Odo eventually entered the monastery of Cluny, one of the most influential monastic centers in medieval Europe. The Cluniac movement emphasized regular prayer, careful liturgy, reverence, discipline, moral reform, service to the larger Christian world. Cluny was known for its atmosphere of structured peace. Pilgrims, scholars, and monks sought it out for guidance. Within its walls, Odo found a space that aligned perfectly with his contemplative nature. Life in Cluny flowed through predictable patterns. Matins before dawn. Breakfast taken in silence. Study in the scriptorium. Work in fields or gardens. Reading scripture. Attending multiple daily services. Learning from older monks. Sitting in courtyards filled with soft sunlight. This environment shaped Odo's character more profoundly than any single teacher. He learned patience. He learned to think slowly. He learned to listen before speaking. He learned to view leadership as service, not authority. These lessons carried into his later life and influenced his papacy in ways that remain visible even now. Internal growth, the formation of a future leader. The years Odo spent in monastic study helped develop qualities essential for the leader he would one day become. Calm judgment, respect for tradition, moral discipline, intellectual curiosity, humility, a willingness to work quietly behind the scenes. The monastery also exposed him to broader church politics. Cluny was respected across Europe, and visiting dignitaries often came seeking advice. Young Odo observed conversations between abbots and nobles, bishops and monks. he saw how spiritual ideals intersected with earthly authority. These observations prepared him for greater leadership. Yet nothing about his demeanor suggested ambition. His growth was slow, natural, and shaped by a quiet desire to serve. A sleep-friendly closing. Picture Odo in his youth, seated at a wooden bench in a shaded courtyard of the monastery. The sun filters through leaves above him. A soft breeze moves the pages of a book. The distant chant of monks drifts through the open cloister walkway. The world feels peaceful, orderly, and full of quiet purpose. He does not yet know he will one day become Pope Urban II. He does not yet imagine the weight of the decisions he will face or the historical echoes his words will carry. He sits simply, reading in the calm of the afternoon, absorbing knowledge that will guide his future. Let this calming scene settle your thoughts as Part 1 gently ends. Part 2. The formation of a Cluniac monk, discipline, study, and the quiet rise of Odo's influence. In Part 1, we followed the young Odo of Chatillon into the early stages of monastic life at Cluny. Now, in Part 2, we continue his journey by exploring the world that truly shaped him into the leader he would one day become. These are the years in which his mind deepened, his character solidified, and his approach to leadership matured into the calm and thoughtful presence that later defined Pope Urban II. The world of Cluny in the mid-11th century was one of quiet rigor, gentle scholarship, and steady devotion. These surroundings provided fertile ground for Odo's growth. Settle in, breathe softly, and let the slow rhythm of monastic life guide you deeper into rest as this chapter unfolds. Daily rhythms of the Cluniac cloister. The Cluniac monastery was one of the most influential spiritual centers in medieval Europe. Its routines were structured with precision, but unlike harsher monastic orders, Cluny emphasized beauty, order, and a peaceful flow of daily life. These rhythms shaped Odo's sense of discipline without overwhelming his spirit. A typical day for Odo would have unfolded gently. Rising before dawn to the deep, resonant call of matins. Joining the community in the darkened church, illuminated by candlelight. Listening to chants that rose slowly into the vaulted air. Walking quietly through stone corridors as morning light entered the cloister. Studying texts under the supervision of experienced monks. Assisting with liturgy. Copying scripture or theological works in the scriptorium. Working in gardens or kitchens when duty required it. Eating simple meals in a dining hall where silence encouraged reflection. Ending the day with compline, where the final prayers of the evening sent the monastery into restful stillness. This repeated, day after day, month after month, year after year. The repetition softened the mind into a state of steadiness. The predictable structure allowed creativity and internal growth to flourish. Odo's heart grew calm and disciplined within this environment, nurtured by the hushed devotion of the Cluniac order. Study in the scriptorium, a place of ink and quiet thought. The scriptorium held a special place in Odo's development. Rows of wooden desks lined the room. Light filtered in from high-arched windows. The air smelled faintly of ink, parchment, and beeswax from candles. This was where monks preserved knowledge. It was also where many young monks found their intellectual voices. Odo spent countless hours carefully copying sacred texts, reading the works of Augustine, Jerome, and Gregory, studying canon law, learning the structure of church councils, reviewing commentaries written by earlier scholars, practicing the clarity and precision required to write theological arguments. Each page he copied forced him to slow his mind, to follow each word with intention, and to consider deeply the content before him. This quiet intellectual repetition cultivated both patience and insight. The scriptorium was not only an academic space. It was a spiritual one. Every stroke of ink was considered a form of prayer. Knowledge was not separate from devotion, but another expression of it. In this environment, Odo refined his thinking and developed a calm, measured approach to complex issues. These qualities would later become essential in his role as Pope, where clarity and composure were necessary to navigate turbulent political and religious landscapes. The influence of senior monks and teachers. The monastery at Cluny attracted some of the finest theologians and spiritual thinkers of its era. Many traveled from distant lands seeking guidance. Others were raised within the order and spent decades perfecting their understanding of scripture, liturgy, and church administration. Odo observed them with quiet respect. His teachers were patient, articulate, deeply learned, attentive to detail, dedicated to structuring a disciplined spiritual environment. They modeled a form of leadership rooted in humility rather than authority. From them, Odo learned that guiding others required calm presence, thoughtful speech, and a foundation of consistent moral conduct. These teachers introduced him to the broader tensions facing the Church. They discussed the growing need for reform, conflicts between clergy and secular nobility, discrepancies in ritual practices across regions, the challenges of maintaining discipline in distant monasteries, the importance of strengthening the authority of the papacy. These discussions allowed Odo to see beyond the walls of the monastery. He began to understand the broader currents of medieval Europe. The seeds of future leadership were being planted quietly, naturally, without haste. The Cluniac vision, a blueprint for his future values. Cluny was not an isolated community. It sat at the heart of an expanding network of monasteries that followed its practices and looked to its abbots for guidance. This created a spiritual community that extended across kingdoms and principalities. The Cluniac vision emphasized moral reform within the clergy, independence from secular control, strict adherence to liturgy, care for the poor, diplomatic skill in resolving disputes, a sense of unity across Christendom. Odo internalized this vision. He saw firsthand how spiritual authority could influence political life. He observed how strong leadership in one monastery could affect dozens of others. This perspective would shape the way he viewed the papacy later in life, not as a distant institution, but as an active guiding force for the entire Christian world. It was in Cluny that he learned that faith and governance were tied together. Good leadership required both spiritual grounding and practical awareness. Broadening horizons, it encounters with visitors and pilgrims. Cluny was a crossroads. Pilgrims, nobles, scholars, envoys, and churchmen often visited the monastery to seek counsel or participate in liturgical celebrations. Some came for help. Others came to offer support. Many brought news from distant lands. Odo learned from these encounters. Reports of political conflicts in France and Germany. The challenges of bishops trying to control local clergy. The growing power of the Norman rulers. Disputes over monastic property. Accounts of spiritual movements in Italy and Spain. Stories of holy sites as far away as Jerusalem. These conversations exposed him to the interconnected nature of medieval Europe. Even while living a quiet monastic life, he felt the subtle pull of broader responsibilities. He learned to listen. He learned to weigh complex information. He learned to respond with calm reasoning. These skills would serve him well when he later faced the demands of the papacy. A growing reputation for intelligence and steadiness. As Odo matured, his teachers and peers began to recognize him as a monk of unusual clarity and discipline. He never sought attention. Instead, his reputation grew quietly through the quality of his work and the steady nature of his character. He was known for thoughtful interpretation of Scripture, careful handling of disputes, consistency in prayer, humility in service, patience in difficult discussions. This reputation eventually spread beyond Cluny. Nearby monasteries heard his name. Bishops learned of his promise. Even distant clergy traveling through the region took note of the young monk who combined intellectual depth with gentle composure. It became increasingly clear that Odo would not remain an anonymous monk. Cluny had shaped him too thoroughly, and his natural gifts were too evident. The course of his life was preparing to shift. A sleep-friendly closing, Odo at dusk. Picture Odo at the end of a long day inside the monastery. The sky is turning violet with evening. The cloister garden is quiet. Lamps glow softly along the stone walkways. Odo walks with slow, deliberate steps, his thoughts calm after hours of study. He hears the distant murmur of monks gathering for evening prayer. He pauses for a moment under an archway, breathing in the cool air, feeling the gentle peace of monastic life settle within him. He does not yet know that he will become Pope Urban II. He does not yet foresee the councils he will lead, the reforms he will champion, or the momentous decisions that will echo through centuries. For now, he is simply Odo, a monk among monks, shaped by quiet discipline and steady faith. Let this image settle in your mind as Part 2 closes softly. Part 3. Service beyond Cluny, Odo's emergence as a diplomat, reformer, and quiet force in church governance. By the time Odo of Chatillon had spent several years within the walls of Cluny, he had become far more than a quiet scholar or disciplined monk. His reputation for calm judgment, intellectual depth, and even temperament had reached well beyond the cloister. Although Cluny was a place of contemplation and stability, it was also deeply connected to the broader world. It sent advisors to kings, abbots to distant monasteries, envoys to mediate disputes, and scholars to assist bishops in matters of theology and reform. Within this environment, Odo began to take on responsibilities that gently expanded the borders of his life. In this chapter, we follow him through the early stages of service outside Cluny, exploring how the quiet young monk gradually became a trusted figure in ecclesiastical affairs. The transitions were subtle. They unfolded not through ambition, but through a steady accumulation of trust. Odo performed each task with patience and clarity. By the time he entered the orbit of the papacy, his character had already been shaped by years of calm leadership. Allow Part 3 to settle you deeper into rest as we follow Odo beyond the cloister walls, into the wider and more complex world of church service. Cluny as a center of outreach and influence. Cluny in the 11th century was more than a monastery. It was a network, a spiritual and administrative heart with ties across Europe. Cluniac houses existed in France, Italy, Spain, and the German territories. Many looked to the mother house for guidance, especially during times of uncertainty. Because of this wide reach, abbots traveled frequently. Monks were sent to mediate disputes. Theological questions arrived by letter. Noble families sought counsel. Kings consulted Cluniac scholars. Bishops turned to the order for support in reform. Cluny was respected for its stability. This meant that promising monks were sometimes chosen for delicate responsibilities. Odo was one of them. His clarity of thought, gentle demeanor, and steady judgment made him a natural candidate for diplomatic and administrative work. Early assignments: quiet responsibilities beyond the cloister. Odo's earliest tasks outside the monastery were small, but they introduced him to the broader rhythms of church governance. He might have been asked to accompany senior monks on visits to affiliated houses. He might have carried messages to bishops or nobles. He may have assisted in evaluating disputes over land, monastic discipline, or clerical behavior. These tasks taught him essential skills: how to speak carefully, how to mediate disagreements, how to interpret church law, how to maintain calm in tense situations, how to observe without haste, how to advise without imposing. He learned that leadership required more than knowledge. It required empathy and restraint. The goal was not to dominate conversations, but to bring clarity and peace. These early assignments gradually deepened his connection to the larger church. The Reform movement, a church seeking renewal. During Odo's lifetime, the church faced serious challenges. Clerical abuses, conflicts between bishops and nobles, disputes over appointments, and inconsistencies in discipline affected many regions. Reformers sought to strengthen clerical celibacy, independence of church offices from secular rulers, liturgical consistency, moral conduct among clergy, the authority of the papacy. Cluny played a central role in this movement. Odo found himself aligned naturally with reform, not because of ideology, but because his years of monastic life had taught him to value order, honesty, and spiritual clarity. As he became more involved in church affairs, he saw that reform required patience. It could not be rushed. It required gentle persuasion rather than force. It required listening to communities that had long-standing traditions of their own. Odo learned that reform was not merely a set of rules. It was a process of guiding people toward a more disciplined and sincere practice of faith. Travel and observation, the broadening of Odo's perspective. Although monastic life was stable, Odo's growing responsibilities sometimes pulled him from the cloister for days or even weeks. Travel in the 11th century was slow and quiet. Horses moved at a steady pace along well-worn paths. Caravans of pilgrims passed along the same routes. Inns and guest houses offered simple rest. These journeys introduced Odo to the diversity of Christian life across Europe. He visited small rural chapels, bustling cathedral towns, monasteries nestled in forests, isolated mountain hermitages, noble households tied to local churches. Each place revealed something different. Some communities were disciplined and reverent. Others struggled with leadership or lacked proper training. Odo took these observations back to Cluny, where they informed discussions about reform. Travel also offered Odo time for reflection. Long rides through quiet landscapes gave him space to think about the challenges facing the church. He learned to balance the idealism of monastic discipline with the practical realities of governing varied communities. These journeys subtly prepared him for the even greater travels he would later undertake as pope. Growing connections with the papal reform circle. As Odo's reputation grew, he came to the attention of reform-minded leaders in Rome. This group included Pope Gregory VII, Hildebrand, the influential archdeacon, cardinals committed to moral and clerical reform, monks who later became powerful advisors. They saw in Odo the qualities needed for higher service. He was thoughtful, measured, and deeply committed to spiritual integrity. Most importantly, he combined monastic discipline with practical wisdom. It was through these connections that Odo eventually left Cluny to serve the papacy directly. His transfer was not abrupt. It unfolded gradually, as more responsibilities drew him into Rome's orbit. Letters from senior churchmen began to arrive at Cluny requesting his assistance. Envoys carried messages encouraging his participation in larger reform efforts. Odo accepted these duties with humility, knowing that service to the broader church required a readiness to leave the comfort of monastic life. Life in Rome, a new chapter begins. When Odo arrived in Rome, he entered a world very different from the quiet of Cluny. The papal court was filled with debates, urgent decisions, visitors from distant lands, disputes requiring judgment, negotiations between secular and clerical authorities. Yet, even in this environment, Odo carried the calm of monastic discipline with him. Fellow clergy noticed his steadiness. They appreciated his ability to listen without bias, to speak without haste, and to consider matters with clarity. The transition from monk to papal advisor could have overwhelmed a less disciplined person. But Odo moved through it with the same serene attention that defined his early studies. He brought the Order of Cluny into the administrative heart of the church. This growing presence in Rome set the stage for the next major step of his life, the moment when he would be elevated first to cardinal, and eventually to the papacy itself. The subtle emergence of leadership. By the time Odo became a trusted advisor in the papal circle, his leadership style was fully formed. It was not loud or forceful. It was not shaped by ambition. It emerged quietly through consistent patience, dedication to reform, genuine humility, deep theological knowledge, experience resolving disputes, exposure to diverse communities. These qualities made him a stabilizing force in a turbulent era. Others turned to him not because he sought power, but because he brought clarity wherever he went. In many ways, this was the foundation of his future success as Pope Urban II. His authority would never rest on force, but on the trust he naturally inspired. A sleep-friendly closing. Odo looking toward his future. Imagine Odo standing in a quiet courtyard in Rome, perhaps near the Lateran Palace. The sky is soft with evening. Olive trees cast long shadows across stone pathways. In the distance, he hears the gentle murmur of priests and scholars discussing matters of reform. He breathes calmly, feeling the transition that has begun. Behind him lies Cluny, with its peaceful rhythms. Before him lies a life of service that will shape the history of Europe. But for now, he stands in a moment of stillness, listening to the hum of the ancient city, allowing the peace of the evening to settle over him like a cloak. Let this image ease your mind as you drift deeper into rest. Part 4. Cardinal Odo, a quiet rise through the church and the path toward the papacy. By the time Odo of Chatillon had settled into his service in Rome, he had entered a new phase of life that extended far beyond the monastic discipline of Cluny. The quiet scholar who once copied manuscripts in a dimly lit scriptorium was now stepping into the heart of church governance. His days unfolded in the presence of bishops, cardinals, papal envoys, legal scholars, and monastic leaders who gathered to discuss matters affecting the entire Christian world. Yet the way Odo carried himself remained unchanged. He moved through these halls with the same calm discipline that shaped his formative years. This chapter follows his rise within the papal administration and his eventual appointment as cardinal. It explores the slow, steady path that prepared him to become Pope Urban II. Nothing about this rise was sudden. It unfolded gradually through trust, reputation, and unwavering dedication. Settle into a comfortable position, breathe softly, and let this quiet chapter guide you deeper into rest. The atmosphere of the papal court in the 11th century. When Odo entered the papal court, Rome was a place of contrasts. The ancient city held the weight of centuries. Its churches stood on foundations older than most kingdoms in Europe. Narrow streets wove through markets filled with simple vendors. Pilgrims from distant lands arrived each day, carrying stories, petitions, and hopes. Clergy consulted with scholars. Ambassadors from powerful rulers sought audiences with the Pope. Monks traveled through Rome to gain support for reform. Within this environment, the papal court served as a center of both spiritual and political decision-making. Odo found himself surrounded by legal deliberations, theological debates, discussions about church discipline, meetings with envoys from France, Germany, and Italy, matters of canon law, disputes involving bishops and secular nobles, correspondence from distant monasteries seeking guidance. Despite the complexity, the atmosphere also contained a quiet rhythm. Days were structured around prayer, reading, and careful discussion. The clerics who served the papacy moved with intention, not haste. The work required intelligence, patience, and a calm temperament. Odo's natural qualities fit seamlessly into this world. A reputation strengthened by integrity. As months passed, Odo's reputation in Rome continued to grow. His fellow clergy noticed that he approached every responsibility with steady, disciplined care. He did not interrupt others. He did not speak impulsively. He weighed each matter with respect for tradition and for the people involved. Roman clergy began to describe him with words that folded gently into his character. Reliable, thoughtful, balanced, knowledgeable, grounded in spiritual discipline. These qualities were rare enough to draw attention. Many clerics who entered the papal court struggled to balance spiritual duty with political realities. Odo, shaped by years of monastic life, brought calm to difficult conversations. His presence softened tensions. His clarity made decisions easier to reach. This slow, quiet accumulation of trust became the foundation of his rise. Responsibilities that prepared him for higher office. Odo did not become a cardinal overnight. Before he was elevated to that role, he served in a variety of positions that deepened his experience. He assisted senior cardinals with legal matters. He wrote responses to questions from bishops. He helped organize councils. He reviewed cases involving disputes over monastic lands. He advised on the placement of abbots. He supported efforts to strengthen clerical discipline. Each responsibility was a lesson. Each task added a new layer to his understanding of church leadership. His assignments included examining disputes between monasteries and local lords, reviewing concerns about improper clerical behavior, assisting bishops struggling with local conflicts, helping enforce reform decrees, advising representatives from distant Christian communities, evaluating petitions brought before the papacy. These tasks were demanding, but Odo approached them with the same calm focus he once brought to his monastic studies. He understood that leadership required patience. He saw that the stability of the Church depended on decisions that were thorough rather than rushed. The influence of Pope Gregory VII. During Odo's time in Rome, the papacy was guided by reformers who sought to strengthen the independence and authority of the Church. Pope Gregory VII, one of the most influential reform popes in history, played a key role in shaping the Church's direction. Gregory championed moral reform among the clergy, the elimination of corruption, and the separation of secular influence from ecclesiastical appointments. Odo found himself aligned with these ideals. Not through ambition, but through conviction formed during his years at Cluny. The Cluniac vision and Gregory's reform movement shared the same heartbeat. Odo observed Gregory's leadership closely. He admired the Pope's resolve, his clarity of purpose, his trust in the monastic orders, his desire to strengthen the moral foundation of the Church. Although Odo did not imitate Gregory's firmness in every way, he learned valuable lessons about what a strong papacy could achieve. He saw how reform, when guided by wisdom, could renew the Church from the inside out. These observations quietly shaped the future Pope Urban II. Elevation to the rank of cardinal. In recognition of his service, his intellect, and his unwavering dedication, Odo was eventually elevated to the rank of cardinal. This was one of the Church's highest offices. A cardinal served as a close advisor to the Pope, assisted in major decisions, helped interpret canon law, and participated in councils that shaped the direction of Christendom. The appointment likely took place in a formal ceremony within one of Rome's ancient churches. The interior would have been filled with the glow of lamps. The scent of incense drifted gently through the air. Clergy stood in quiet rows as Odo received the symbols of his new office. The ceremony was not loud or triumphant. It reflected the solemn dignity of the role. Becoming a cardinal deepened Odo's responsibilities. He was now entrusted with matters that affected the entire Christian world. His voice carried weight. His counsel influenced papal decisions. His judgment shaped reforms that would echo across Europe. Yet despite this increase in responsibility, Odo remained grounded. He continued to practice the discipline of prayer, reading, and reflection that he had learned in Cluny. Council work. A gentle expansion of authority. As cardinal, Odo participated in church councils that addressed clerical discipline, the behavior of bishops, disputes between nobles and clergy, matters of theology, monastic reform, relations with Eastern Christianity, the growing unrest in regions threatened by external forces. Councils unfolded slowly, over days or weeks. Delegates from many regions gathered to present concerns. Odo listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions, and offering thoughtful guidance when appropriate. His calm presence in these councils became one of his defining characteristics. He did not dominate discussions. Instead, he provided clarity when others grew uncertain. His ability to remain composed during heated debates earned him widespread respect. Service as papal legate, carrying authority with grace. In time, Odo's reliability led to another important responsibility. He was appointed papal legate for certain missions, meaning he carried the authority of the Pope to distant regions. A legate was trusted to represent the papacy with care, to mediate disputes, and to guide communities toward reform. As legate, Odo traveled through France and Italy. His visits were calm, deliberate, and pastoral. He listened to local leaders. He visited monasteries. He reviewed the condition of clergy. He offered counsel gently, without force. These missions strengthened his understanding of Europe's spiritual and social landscapes. They also increased his visibility. Many church leaders who met him during these visits recognized his wisdom and integrity. His quiet influence grew. A sleep-friendly closing, Odo at peace in his new role. Imagine Odo at the end of a long day in Rome, standing in the soft glow of twilight near the Lateran Gardens. Olive trees rustle gently overhead. The air is cool and carries the faint sound of distant bells. Odo reflects on his responsibilities with calm acceptance. He knows his role is important, but he holds it lightly, understanding that true leadership begins not with authority, but with humility. The world around him grows quiet as night settles. The soft rhythm of his breathing matches the stillness of the evening. Let this peaceful image guide you toward rest as Part 4 closes softly. Part 5. The Road to the Tiara, Odo's final years before the papacy and the quiet shaping of Urban II. Before Odo of Chatillon became Pope Urban II, there was a final period of his life that served as a bridge between humble monastic roots and the immense responsibility of leading the entire Latin Church. These years were neither loud nor triumphant. They were marked instead by a calm unfolding of leadership, a deepening trust from the reformers of Rome, and a growing awareness within the Church that Odo possessed the rare combination of steadiness, clarity, and spiritual discipline required of a pope. In this chapter, we follow Odo during the years immediately preceding his election. He is now a cardinal, a papal legate, and one of the quiet central figures in the reform movement. His influence grows, not through ambition, but through the natural expansion of trust placed upon him. These years shaped the character of Pope Urban II long before he became Urban. They prepared him to guide the Church during one of its most pivotal eras. Settle in comfortably, let your breathing slow and deepen, and allow this chapter to unfold gently around you. A cardinal's life, calm authority in a complex world. By the late 1070s and early 1080s, Odo's reputation within the Church had become firmly established. He had served at councils, mediated disputes across Europe, and carried out sensitive missions on behalf of the papacy. Yet despite these responsibilities, his life retained a quiet rhythm. Cardinals lived simply compared to secular nobles. Their households were modest. Their days were structured around prayer and liturgy, reading and reflection, council meetings, review of ecclesiastical cases, correspondence with bishops and abbots, diplomatic negotiations. Odo managed these duties with the same discipline he had learned at Cluny. His monastic training shaped every decision he made. He approached problems slowly and carefully. He listened more than he spoke. He evaluated conflicting accounts with patience. His presence calmed heated discussions. These traits were noticed by those around him. In an era of uncertainty, Odo offered steady ground. The investiture controversy, a turbulent backdrop. Odo's rise occurred during one of the most challenging conflicts in medieval Europe. The investiture controversy, a struggle between the papacy and secular rulers over the appointment of bishops, shook the foundations of political and religious order. At the center of this conflict was Pope Gregory VII, who insisted that the Church must remain free from secular interference. Odo was deeply aligned with Gregory's reform ideals, although his personal style was far gentler than Gregory's uncompromising firmness. Odo supported the principles guiding the reform movement: clerical independence, moral discipline, freedom of the Church from secular domination. Spiritual integrity within the clergy. These ideals formed the spiritual foundation of Odo's worldview. They prepared him for his future role as Pope, where he would need to balance strength with diplomacy. Throughout this turbulent period, Odo remained a voice of calm reason. His ability to navigate conflicts without escalating them made him invaluable to Gregory and the other reformers. Diplomatic missions, the quiet work of healing and guidance. Odo's role as papal legate expanded during these years. He traveled across Europe to mediate disputes, encourage reform, and represent the papacy in delicate political situations. These missions unfolded in quiet, measured steps. He traveled to France, where monastic communities sought clarity on reform. Italy, where conflicts between bishops and nobles required mediation. Regions influenced by the Normans, where the church sought stability. His journeys were not grand or accompanied by elaborate processions. They were conducted in the same reflective manner that characterized his life. He met with clergy and laity. He listened to local concerns. He worked patiently to guide communities toward unity. These missions allowed Odo to see the church in its full diversity. He understood how customs varied from region to region. He gained a deeper awareness of the struggles faced by ordinary Christians. He saw how local politics influenced spiritual life. These observations strengthened his ability to lead later as Pope. A trusted advisor, Odo's role near the papal throne. As tensions between the papacy and secular rulers grew more intense, Pope Gregory VII relied heavily on his inner circle of advisors. Odo was among them. Although he was not a loud or aggressive figure, his calm insight made him invaluable during moments of doubt or disagreement. He participated in drafting important documents, interpreting canon law, offering counsel during political crises, analyzing reports from distant territories, advising on the appointment of bishops and abbots, preparing for church councils. Gregory VII respected Odo's balanced judgment. Other cardinals recognized his wisdom. His insights helped guide reform without alienating communities. His ability to remain composed gave stability to a papal court often shaken by external pressures. Odo's influence continued to grow, not because he sought power, but because he embodied the virtues necessary for leadership, patience, humility, and clarity. The death of Gregory VII, a turning point. When Pope Gregory VII died in 1085, the Church experienced a moment of uncertainty. The conflict with the Holy Roman Emperor was ongoing. The reform movement still needed defenders. The papacy required leaders who could continue Gregory's mission while easing tensions where possible. Although Odo was respected, he was not immediately chosen to succeed Gregory. Instead, a series of popes and antipopes emerged during a period of political instability. Odo continued to serve faithfully, advising the legitimate successors and helping maintain unity where he could. During this time, Odo did not push himself forward. He remained steady, working quietly to support the Church through one of its most fragile periods. But his calm leadership did not go unnoticed. A man others turned to. As the years passed, an increasing number of clergy looked to Odo for guidance. In an era marked by conflict, he offered peace. In a time of harsh rhetoric, he offered reason. In moments of uncertainty, he provided structure and clarity. Several qualities made him stand out. His monastic discipline provided moral grounding. His diplomatic experience offered practical wisdom. His theological knowledge ensured informed decisions. His gentle leadership style encouraged unity. His loyalty to reform reassured supporters of Gregory's vision. By the late 1080s, many saw Odo as the kind of leader who could balance firmness with compassion, tradition with adaptability, and spiritual authority with pastoral sensitivity. These traits made him an ideal choice for the papacy. Approaching the election, a quiet acceptance of fate. When the moment came for the election of a new pope in 1088, Odo did not seek the position. Those who knew him understood that he had no ambition for power. His life had been one of service rather than aspiration. But the Church needed a leader who could carry forward reform without deepening division. Odo was the natural choice. Imagine him in the days leading up to the election. He walks through the shaded courtyards of the Lateran, deep in thought. The air is warm. A quiet breeze moves the leaves of olive trees overhead. Cardinals hold private discussions nearby, their voices low and serious. Odo does not push himself forward. He waits calmly, knowing that leadership, if given to him, must be carried with humility. When he finally learns that he has been chosen to lead the Church, he accepts with the same calm dignity that shaped his entire life. The monk from Cluny, the scholar from the scriptorium, the diplomat who traveled on behalf of reform, the trusted advisor and cardinal, will now become Pope Urban II. His path has been slow, steady, and peaceful. The qualities he brings to the papacy were shaped not by ambition, but by years of quiet discipline. A sleep-friendly closing. Picture Odo on the night before his election. The city of Rome settles into darkness. Lamps glow faintly along narrow streets. A soft wind moves through the trees. Odo sits in quiet reflection, aware that his life is about to change, but still grounded in the calm faith that has carried him since youth. He closes his eyes, feeling the peace of the evening settle around him, preparing his heart for what lies ahead. Let this tranquil image rest with you as Part 5 comes to a gentle close. Part 6. The election of Pope Urban II, a quiet acceptance, a humble beginning, and the calm rise of a new shepherd. The year was 1088. Rome, ancient and weathered, lay beneath early spring sunlight. The city carried with it the weight of centuries, but it also carried the uncertainty of a church emerging painfully from conflict. The death of Gregory VII had left the papacy in a delicate position, still recovering from the intense struggles of the investiture controversy. In these fragile years, the Church needed a leader who could continue the work of reform while restoring calm, unity, and a sense of balance. That leader, though he did not seek the role, would be the quiet, thoughtful monk from Cluny, Odo of Chatillon. Part 6 invites you to drift gently through the events surrounding his election. This chapter focuses not on political triumph, but on the stillness of acceptance, the soft resolve of humility, and the deep breath that marks the beginning of a new spiritual era. Let your breathing slow as we walk through this transition with him. Rome in 1088, an atmosphere of hope and uncertainty. When the cardinals gathered to elect a new pope, Rome was not the bustling, stable capital one might imagine. Its streets were worn and uneven. Its churches stood in quiet dignity amid the ruins of ancient buildings. Clergy and pilgrims moved slowly across the city, carrying concerns that stretched across Europe. The papacy needed a shepherd who could unify a fractured Christendom. Within this environment, Odo's name carried weight. Not because he had worked to elevate it, but because he had lived a life of quiet reliability. The cardinals observed in him a combination of qualities that were rare and deeply valued. Intellectual clarity, monastic discipline, steady emotional temperament. loyalty to the reform movement, diplomatic skill, humility, pastoral gentleness. These qualities shone even more brightly in a time of turmoil. The gathering of the cardinals. The election took place outside Rome, in the fortified town of Terracina, where the papal supporters gathered safely. Cardinals arrived slowly, traveling on horseback or by foot, making their way along coastal roads lined with olive groves and spring wildflowers. Many carried the weight of their responsibilities with them. The church needed unity. The clergy needed a guide. The reform movement needed a voice that could speak with conviction without stirring unnecessary anger. When they gathered within the council chamber, the atmosphere was solemn and measured. Lamps burned with steady light. Scrolls and records lay neatly arranged on tables. The voices of cardinals murmured quietly as they discussed the future of the church. Odo did not speak often during these early discussions. He listened, as he always had. He observed the tension in the room, the fatigue on the faces of men who had traveled long distances to fulfill their sacred duty. He felt the weight of history pressing against the walls of the chamber. Yet he remained calm. His long years of monastic discipline had taught him to move slowly, to breathe deeply, and to act only with clarity. The election, a moment of stillness and acceptance. When the moment finally arrived, the cardinals cast their votes. The decision, though rooted in discussion and reflection, emerged naturally. Odo of Chatillon was chosen. The monk from Cluny, the quiet advisor, the patient diplomat, was now to become the Bishop of Rome. The room did not erupt with triumphant celebration. Instead, there was a sense of peaceful relief. The church had found, in Odo, a man capable of leading with steadiness and humility. When Odo heard his name, he remained still for a long moment. He did not rise quickly. He closed his eyes in gentle reflection, holding the silence as if to honor the gravity of what had been asked of him. Those around him watched the calm expression on his face. There was no ambition, no sign of desire for authority. Only a quiet acceptance, shaped by years of prayer and discipline. When he finally opened his eyes, he spoke softly, expressing gratitude and a quiet readiness to serve. Choosing his papal name, Urban. Upon accepting the role, Odo chose the name Urban too. Papal names carried symbolic meaning, and the name Urban suggested qualities of order, peace, and cultivated harmony. It was a name chosen by several great popes before him, all known for guiding the church with steadiness and care. Urban wanted his papacy to reflect the cultivation of unity, the continuation of reform, the restoration of peace, the strengthening of spiritual discipline, the nurturing of Christian communities. The name Urban aligned perfectly with the tone he hoped to set. The quiet ceremony of coronation. Urban II was crowned pope in a ceremony marked by solemn reverence rather than political show. The setting was filled with candlelight. The chants of clergy echoed softly through the church. The newly elected pope walked slowly toward the altar, surrounded by cardinals who recognized both the humility and strength he carried. The coronation was not simply the placing of a tiara on a head. It was the formal beginning of a new chapter in the life of the church. Urban bowed his head as prayers were chanted around him, accepting the responsibilities with the same calm that had guided him since his youth. This moment marked his transition from monk to pope, but internally, Urban remained the same contemplative soul who once studied manuscripts in Cluny. Urban's first days as pope, a gentle assertion of leadership. Immediately after his election, Urban II began to shape the tone of his papacy. He moved carefully, avoiding sudden changes or forceful declarations. Instead, he focused on establishing trust with the cardinals, communicating gratitude and humility, meeting with clergy to understand urgent needs, reaffirming the principles of the Reform movement, offering pastoral warmth to those seeking guidance. Urban did not govern through fear. He governed through clarity and compassion. His quiet confidence inspired others. Clergy who met with him in these early days often described his presence as steady and reassuring. He carried the authority of the papacy with a gentle dignity. Immediate challenges and Urban's calm response. Urban too inherited a difficult situation. Rome was under pressure from rival claimants to the papacy, known as antipopes. Political alliances were fragile. Many regions required reform. Clergy needed guidance. The faithful needed clarity. Yet Urban did not allow anxiety to take root. He approached each challenge with reflection, consultation, steady movement toward solutions, unwavering trust in the legitimacy of the Church's mission. Urban understood that the papacy required patience and moral strength. His calm manner allowed him to navigate obstacles that might have overwhelmed a more volatile or ambitious leader. A sleep-friendly closing, the new pope at twilight. Imagine Urban II standing on a balcony in Terracina shortly after his election. The sea stretches out in the distance, dark and calm beneath the fading evening sky. The wind carries the scent of salt and herbs from nearby hills. Lamps glow softly in the streets below. Urban looks out across the landscape, feeling the quiet weight of his new role. He is not afraid. He is not overwhelmed. He breathes calmly, trusting that the discipline he learned in Cluny will continue to guide him. In this moment, he is simply a servant of the Church, standing in the soft transition from day to night, ready to lead with compassion and clarity. Let this peaceful image ease your mind as Part 6 settles into tranquility. Part 7. The early reign of Pope Urban II, establishing calm authority, strengthening reform, and healing a divided church. When Urban II settled into his role as Pope, he inherited a church that was fragile, divided, and in need of both gentle healing and firm direction. The years before his election had been marked by schism, political pressure, and deep uncertainty. Yet as he began his early reign, Urban approached these challenges with the same calm steadiness that had defined his entire life. His papacy did not begin with loud declarations or sweeping gestures. Instead, it unfolded softly, shaped by careful planning, patient diplomacy, and a deep understanding of the spiritual and political landscape of Europe. This chapter explores the early actions of Pope Urban II, not as moments of triumph, but as steady movements toward stability. We see him walking the halls of the papal residence, meeting calmly with advisors, writing letters of guidance, and slowly bringing the Church back into harmony. Settle in comfortably, allow your breath to soften, and let Part 7 carry you deeper into rest. A papacy in exile, leading from outside Rome. Although Urban II was elected pope, he could not immediately govern from the city of Rome. The city was partially controlled by supporters of the anti-pope Clement III. As a result, Urban began his early reign from southern Italy, receiving envoys, writing letters, and making decisions from fortified towns and loyal monastic centers. Rather than seeing this as an obstacle, Urban treated it as a quiet space to begin his work with clarity. He had no desire to rush into conflict. Instead, he used this time to strengthen his alliances, communicate gently but firmly with bishops, reinforce the principles of reform, establish trust among the clergy, clarify his vision for the Church. This period of papal exile resembled a retreat of sorts, providing him with a calm environment to plan the direction of his papacy. The slow pace allowed careful reflection. Reform as the foundation of Urban's early efforts. Urban II inherited the reform movement begun by Pope Gregory VII, but he shaped it with a gentler touch. Gregory had been firm, resolute, and sometimes confrontational. Urban shared the same goals, yet he approached them with patience and pastoral warmth. The early pillars of his reform work included promoting clerical celibacy, protecting church offices from secular interference, ensuring proper election of bishops, strengthening the independence of monasteries, reducing corruption and moral laxity, encouraging unity among reform-minded clergy. Urban understood that reform was not simply a matter of issuing decrees. It required spiritual renewal, cooperation, and persistent teaching. He wrote letters to bishops and abbots that combined instruction with encouragement. His tone was firm yet compassionate, authoritative yet calming, strengthening relationships with powerful allies. Urban II recognized that the papacy could not restore stability alone. It required support from Christian rulers across Europe. Early in his papacy, Urban began cultivating relationships with influential leaders, including the Normans in southern Italy, reform-minded clergy in France, monastic leaders across Europe, nobles loyal to the reform cause. These relationships were vital. The Normans, in particular, offered protection against forces loyal to the antipope. Their support allowed Urban to move more freely through Italy. Their presence created conditions for the pope to gradually reassert authority over Rome itself. Urban's diplomacy was rooted in humility. He did not demand loyalty. He sought cooperation. His calm approach reassured rulers that he aimed not to dominate them, but to strengthen the spiritual order of Christendom. Correspondence, the quiet power of letters. A significant part of Urban's early papacy involved writing letters. These letters traveled across Europe, carried by messengers who crossed mountains, rivers, forests, and busy trade routes. Urban's words reached bishops struggling with local disputes, abbots seeking guidance on reform, rulers navigating political tensions, monastic communities eager to align with papal authority, clergy unsure how to balance tradition with renewed reform. Urban's letters were known for their clarity and gentleness. They corrected without shaming. They guided without overwhelming. They encouraged without exaggeration. Through these letters, Urban reconnected distant communities with the heart of the Church. He fostered unity through thoughtful communication, restoring trust in the papacy during a fragile era. Council preparations. Laying the groundwork for renewed unity. One of Urban's earliest priorities was preparing for future councils that would bring clergy together to reaffirm reform and strengthen the Church's internal cohesion. Councils allowed leaders to gather, discuss concerns, clarify doctrine, and renew commitment to shared principles. Urban began by sending invitations to bishops across Europe, organizing travel routes for delegates, preparing lists of issues requiring discussion, working quietly with advisors to ensure careful planning, identifying regions where local conflicts might obstruct participation. These preparations took time. Urban preferred thoroughness over haste. He understood that a poorly prepared council could deepen divisions rather than heal them. The groundwork he laid in these early years would later culminate in major gatherings, including the famous Council of Clermont. A pope who traveled, the gently moving shepherd. Unlike many of his predecessors, Urban II did not remain confined to Rome. In the early years of his papacy, he traveled extensively throughout Italy and France, visiting churches, monasteries, and Christian communities. These journeys took place slowly, often along quiet roads lined with olive trees, vineyards, or open countryside. Travel offered several benefits. Urban could meet clergy face to face. He could resolve disputes personally. He could encourage reform through example. He could reassure communities unsure about the legitimacy of his papacy. He could strengthen ties with loyal rulers. Wherever he traveled, he carried himself with the calm presence of a monk. People who met him often described a sense of quiet confidence. He spoke gently. He listened carefully. He moved deliberately, as though guided by an inner stillness rooted in years of contemplation. Urban's relationship with the monastic world. Monastic communities held a special place in Urban's heart. They had shaped him from youth. They had formed his character. And they became some of his most reliable allies during his papacy. In these early years, he sought to strengthen their independence, support their internal reforms, encourage new foundations, protect them from interference, deepen their spiritual influence across Europe. Urban believed that monasteries provided spiritual stability for society. They preserved learning. They taught discipline. They offered sanctuaries of calm reflection. They trained leaders. Their example inspired the faithful. Urban often stayed in monasteries during his travels. He walked through their gardens at dusk. He attended their liturgies. He held long conversations with abbots who shared his reform ideals. These interactions rejuvenated him and reinforced his sense of purpose. A sleep-friendly closing, Urban II at evening prayer. Picture Pope Urban II standing in a small chapel attached to a monastery in southern Italy. The evening sun filters through narrow windows, painting warm colors across stone walls. The monks chant softly, their voices blending into a steady rhythm that rises gently toward the vaulted ceiling. Urban stands near the back, hands folded, eyes lowered in contemplation. The responsibilities of his early papacy rest upon his shoulders, but he carries them with calm trust. Outside, the sky darkens. Olive trees sway softly in the wind. Lamps flicker along the cloister walkway. Urban breathes deeply, feeling the peace of the moment settle into his spirit. Let this quiet scene guide your thoughts toward rest as Part 7 comes to a close. Part 8. Urban II's pastoral journeys, a traveling pope bringing calm, unity, and gentle reform across Europe. In the first years of his papacy, Urban II became known not only for his thoughtful leadership, but also for his willingness to travel. Many medieval popes remained in Rome or close to it, governing from the Lateran or delegating large portions of their responsibilities to legates. Urban followed a different path. He understood that the Church was vast, varied, and sometimes uncertain in its loyalties. If he wished to restore unity after years of turbulence, he would need to meet clergy and laity face to face. He would need to travel, to listen, to guide, and to teach. This chapter explores Urban's pastoral journeys across Italy and France, where he moved slowly through quiet countryside, visited monasteries that shaped the spiritual life of Europe, and strengthened the bonds of a church seeking direction. His travels became a gentle expression of pastoral care, a way of bringing peace and reassurance to communities that had endured years of instability. Settling comfortably, breathe softly, and allow this chapter to unfold with a slow, peaceful rhythm. Why Urban traveled, a pope among the people. Urban's papacy began during a time of division. An antipope still held influence in Rome. Some nobles supported rival claimants. Many bishops were unsure which spiritual authority to follow. Urban did not want unity to come through force or political maneuvering. Instead, he chose a more pastoral path. He believed that personal presence could calm fears, clarify confusion, and rebuild trust. Traveling allowed Urban to reassure clergy about the legitimacy of reform, strengthen alliances with sympathetic rulers, resolve disputes that weakened local churches, encourage monastic communities, explain his vision for a renewed Christendom, listen to concerns with genuine patience. These journeys were demanding, but Urban embraced them with the same discipline calm that shaped his earlier life. Moving through Italy, quiet roads and gentle diplomacy. Urban's first major journeys kept him in Italy, especially in the southern regions where the Normans offered reliable protection. The Italian countryside, with its hills, olive groves, vineyards, and small stone villages, welcomed the Pope with an atmosphere of quiet beauty. Travel in medieval Italy involved slow movement along dusty roads. Horses trotted at gentle rhythms. Small groups traveled with Urban, including clerics, advisors, scribes, guards, a few monks or abbots, messengers carrying correspondence. The pace of travel allowed for frequent moments of reflection. Urban often used these long rides to meditate on scripture or consider the pressing issues of the church. In towns and villages, crowds gathered to receive blessings. People knelt, some with tears in their eyes, grateful to see the Pope after years of uncertainty. Urban responded with calm warmth. He spoke to them softly, offering reassurance that the church was being renewed with steady hands. His presence alone brought peace. Visits to monasteries, finding strength in the cloister. Monasteries served as spiritual anchors throughout Europe. They offered education, hospitality, charity, and stability. To Urban, they were more than institutions. They were homes of prayer, centers of learning, and reminders of the discipline that had shaped his own life. During his travels, Urban often stayed in monasteries such as Monte Cassino, La Cava, Cluniac houses in Italy and France. Smaller regional monasteries committed to reform. These stays were restorative. Urban would join monks for their liturgical hours, walking into chapels filled with candlelight, where chants echoed softly against stone walls. He found comfort in the steady rhythm of monastic life, which contrasted gently with the demands of the papacy. Urban met privately with abbots, discussing the need for discipline, the training of clergy, the protection of monastic lands, safe havens for education, the spiritual needs of the surrounding region. These conversations shaped his strategies for reform. Monasteries were among his greatest allies, and Urban treated them with the respect of one who understood their essential role. Journey into France, strengthening the heart of Christendom. Urban's most significant journey began in 1095, when he traveled northward into France. France was not merely a region. It was the spiritual and intellectual center of much of Western Christianity. Many reformers, scholars, and respected clergymen lived there. Urban himself had deep ties to the region through Cluny. Traveling across France allowed him to reconnect with the landscapes of his youth. He passed through rolling fields of grain, vineyards stretching across gentle hillsides, quiet villages centered around stone churches, monasteries surrounded by forests, fortified towns where clergy welcomed him with reverence. Urban moved slowly, stopping often to meet with bishops, clergy, abbots, and lay people. He listened to concerns about local disputes, guided communities in need of reform, and encouraged unity among leaders. Wherever he went, he created a sense of peaceful direction. His steady presence reassured people that the church was moving toward stability. Encouraging clergy and laity, a shepherd's approach. Urban believed deeply in pastoral care. He did not treat the papacy as a distant authority. He treated it as a calling to serve. During his travels, he held gatherings where he spoke gently to the faithful, encouraging them to remain devoted to the church and to embrace the ideals of reform. His messages often focused on kindness, charity, disciplined spiritual practice, respect for clergy, moral living, unity, forgiveness. Urban's voice was not loud or forceful. It carried a quiet strength that came from years of reflection. Even those who disagreed with aspects of reform found it difficult to resist his calm and patient approach. Council planning during his travels. Urban's travels were not merely pastoral. They were also strategic. While moving through France, he met with bishops to prepare for major councils that would shape the future of the church. His most important goal was to hold a great council where he could reaffirm reform, unify leaders, and clarify doctrine. This long-planned council would eventually become the famous Council of Clermont, a turning point not only in his papacy but in medieval history. Yet during these early stages of planning, the tone remained calm and methodical. Urban consulted quietly with bishops, exchanged letters with abbots, and prepared a list of issues requiring discussion. He worked with the same patient attention he brought to simpler tasks. Nothing in Urban's method felt rushed or improvised. A deepening connection with the faithful. As Urban traveled, something remarkable happened. The people who met him began to view him not merely as a distant leader, but as a shepherd who walked among them. His humility softened hearts. His patience inspired trust. His clarity brought comfort. People approached him with stories of hardship, fears about political conflicts, requests for blessings, concerns about clergy, hopes for unity, prayers for peace. Urban listened with genuine care. His responses were gentle and thoughtful. Many later described him as a man who brought peace simply by being present. A sleep-friendly closing, Urban II on a quiet road at dusk. Imagine Urban II riding slowly along a French country road at the end of a long day. Evening settles softly across the landscape. The sky glows with shades of lavender and gold. Birds quiet their songs as night approaches. The papal entourage moves at a calm pace, hooves muffled against the earth. Urban looks at the fields beside him, remembering his youth in this land. He breathes deeply, feeling a sense of peace and purpose. Ahead, a monastery waits with lamplight in its windows, ready to welcome him for evening prayer. He closes his eyes briefly, letting the peaceful rhythm of the road settle within him. Let this gentle image guide your thoughts toward rest as Part 8 comes to a quiet close. Part 9. The Council of Piacenza, Urban II's first great gathering and the soft reweaving of a fractured church. As Pope Urban II traveled across Italy and France, slowly rebuilding trust in the papacy, he sensed that the church needed moments of collective renewal. Letters and visits helped, but they could not replace the unifying power of a formal council. Councils brought together clergy from distant regions, allowed grievances to be voiced, and created space for clear decisions that benefited all of Christendom. They served as a gentle stitching together of a church that had endured decades of strain. Before Urban arrived in France for the more famous Council of Clermont, he first convened a significant gathering in northern Italy, known as the Council of Piacenza. This early council shaped the direction of his papacy, laying the groundwork for broader unity, gentle reform, and renewed confidence in the Church. Part 9 guides you through this gathering with a soft, peaceful pace. The tone is quiet and reflective. The atmosphere is one of calm deliberation and slow, thoughtful decision-making. Allow your breathing to deepen. Let the Council of Piacenza unfold with restful clarity. Choosing Piacenza, a city suited for calm deliberation. Urban II selected Piacenza as the site of his council in early 1095. Located in northern Italy, the city sat along the banks of the Po River. It was neither too distant from Rome nor too close to regions affected by political tension. Its gentle hills, broad river landscape, and quiet streets created an ideal setting for a council. The city was accessible for bishops from Italy, monks from nearby monasteries, envoys from the German territories, representatives of lay rulers, observers from France, pilgrims and laity seeking resolution of personal disputes. The setting itself helped soften the mood. Delegates arrived along roads lined with early spring fields, passing villages where farmers prepared land for planting. The approach to Piacenza offered a sense of renewal, fitting for a council meant to heal and rebuild. Urban's arrival, a quiet procession through the city. When Urban entered Piacenza, it was not with great pomp. His procession was simple but dignified. Clergy walked beside him. A small group of guards moved quietly in formation. Locals gathered in respectful silence to greet him. The atmosphere was reverent and calm. Urban greeted the people personally, offering blessings with a gentle expression. He understood that his presence needed to reassure. He knew that many in Italy had endured years of confusion due to the rival antipope. His calm manner and steady movements restored trust before he spoke a single word. His arrival in Piacenza symbolized hope. It represented the beginning of a new chapter for the Church. The gathering of delegates, a peaceful assembly. The Council of Piacenza attracted a remarkable number of attendees. Contemporary accounts speak of thousands of clergy and laity gathering in and around the city. The number was so great that the main assembly could not take place inside a church but had to be held in a field outside the city walls. Despite the large crowd, the mood remained orderly. Delegates arrived with quiet purpose, carrying scrolls, letters, and records. Monks traveled with modest bundles of manuscripts. Bishops arrived with small entourages of clergy. Envoys from noble families approached with careful diplomacy. The gathering felt like a slow tide of humanity, flowing gently into Piacenza to listen, to speak, and to seek guidance. Urban observed this calm movement with gratitude. The Church was gathering not in anger, but in hope. The issues before the council, gentle but firm reform. Urban II approached the council with a clear agenda shaped by the needs of the Church. He understood that reform required clarity, but but he also understood that communities needed gentle guidance rather than harsh condemnation. The major issues presented included clerical marriage and the need for celibacy, simony, or the buying and selling of church offices, disputes between clergy and secular rulers, protection of monastic property, conflicts over the appointment of bishops, matters of canon law that required updated interpretation, pastoral concerns brought by laypeople. Each matter was treated with steady seriousness. Delegates spoke slowly and respectfully. Urban listened patiently, asking thoughtful questions. Although the council addressed complex issues, its atmosphere resembled a peaceful gathering of minds rather than a contentious debate. The role of monks and reformers, voices of calm renewal. Monks from influential houses such as Cluny played an important role at Piacenza. They offered guidance in matters of spiritual discipline and helped articulate the ideals of reform. Their calm presence encouraged unity. For Urban, these monks were spiritual companions. Their disciplined voices reminded delegates that the ultimate goal of reform was not punishment, but renewal. Their contributions shaped decisions in ways that blended moral clarity with compassion. Urban relied on their council, drawing from their experience in shaping communities bound by prayer and discipline. Secular rulers and lay concerns, a gentle balancing act. Many secular rulers sent representatives to Piacenza. They came not to influence papal decisions, but to understand how reform would affect their regions. Urban welcomed them with openness, viewing their presence as a sign of their desire for stability. Lay people also approached the council with personal concerns. Some sought settlements of disputes involving land or family. Others requested clarification about local clerical behavior. Urban offered patient attention to their needs, showing that the church was not distant but deeply connected to the lives of ordinary people. These moments revealed one of Urban's greatest strengths. He could balance the needs of clergy, nobility, and laity without losing the soft moral focus that defined his approach. The council's decisions, quiet steps toward unity. Over the course of the council, Urban II and the delegates reached several important decisions that helped guide the church forward. These decisions reinforced earlier reforms while offering clearer guidance. The council reaffirmed the importance of clerical celibacy, the rejection of simony, the proper procedures for elections, the authority of the papacy in spiritual matters, the independence of monasteries, the need for moral discipline among clergy, the importance of pastoral care. None of these decisions were new in principle, but the council provided a peaceful and authoritative setting for their reaffirmation. Delegates left Piacenza with renewed clarity. A surprising presence, envoys from the Byzantine Empire. One of the most notable occurrences at the Council of Piacenza was the arrival of envoys from the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos. They came seeking Western assistance against the Seljuk Turks, who threatened the stability of the Eastern Empire. Urban listened thoughtfully. He understood the spiritual and political significance of the request. Although he did not announce his intentions immediately, this moment became a quiet spark that would later lead to the Council of Clermont and the First Crusade. Yet at Piacenza, the tone remained gentle. Urban offered sympathy rather than declarations. He focused on unity, understanding that the moment for larger decisions would come later. A sleep-friendly closing, the field at Piacenza at sunset. Imagine the fields outside Piacenza at the close of a long day of council sessions. Delegates disperse slowly, walking in small groups toward their lodgings. The sun sets behind distant hills, casting soft golden light across the landscape. Urban remained seated beneath a simple canopy, reviewing notes with quiet concentration. The air is calm. Birds settle into trees. The chanted prayers of monks drift through the evening air. Urban breathes softly, grateful for the progress made and aware that the path ahead will require continued patience. Let this tranquil scene rest gently in your mind as Part 9 closes with peaceful stillness. Part 10. The Council of Clermont, Urban II's voice, his vision, and the quiet unfolding of a turning point. By the time Pope Urban II arrived in central France in late 1095, his long months of travel had already strengthened the bonds of a church in need of unity. He had met bishops, monks, nobles, and ordinary laypeople. He had listened to disputes with patient attention. He had guided communities toward reform with gentle clarity. Through these efforts, Urban created a foundation of trust. That foundation would support one of the most significant gatherings of his papacy, the Council of Clermont. Clermont became the moment when Urban's long-prepared vision came into focus. It was a council shaped by quiet discipline, years of steady reform, and a deep desire to bring spiritual renewal to Christendom. Although one part of the council became famous for its lasting historical impact, the gathering itself was peaceful, pastoral, and deeply rooted in the spiritual concerns of the time. This chapter unfolds slowly, guiding you through the gentle rhythm of a council that shaped the medieval world. Settle in, let your breath soften, and allow the story to carry you toward rest. Urban's arrival in Clermont, a warm return to familiar ground. Urban II returned to France with a sense of calm familiarity. He had spent many years there as a monk and later as a reformer. He knew its monasteries, its bishops, and its landscapes. Traveling into the region felt like stepping back into a place that had shaped his own spiritual life. Clermont, located in the region of Auvergne, rested among rolling hills and volcanic formations. Its streets wound gently around stone churches and houses with slate roofs. In late autumn, the air carried a cool stillness. Trees stood nearly bare. Smoke drifted from hearths. The city prepared quietly for the arrival of hundreds of delegates. Urban entered the city with the same simplicity he displayed in Piacenza. There was no overwhelming grandeur. Instead, there was a sense of calm purpose. People greeted him with reverence, appreciating not only his office, but the peaceful manner in which he carried it. The council opens. A gathering rooted in spiritual renewal. The Council of Clermont began in November of 1095. As at Piacenza, large numbers of clergy attended, along with monks, nobles, and laity. The atmosphere was orderly and thoughtful. Delegates settled into the city, lodging in monasteries, churches, and guest houses. The rhythm of the council days unfolded slowly. Urban opened the proceedings by calling delegates toward renewed spiritual discipline. He spoke about the need for moral integrity among clergy, the importance of canonical appointments, the protection of church property, unity between monastic and episcopal communities, strengthened devotion among the faithful, the continued rejection of simony, the steady enforcement of clerical celibacy. These were not new ideas, but Urban presented them with a clarity shaped by years of experience. His tone was calm and pastoral. He did not seek to overwhelm listeners. He aimed instead to remind them of their shared responsibilities. Urban's gentle leadership within the council. Throughout the council, Urban acted more like a teacher and shepherd than a commanding ruler. He listened to the voices of bishops, allowed lengthy discussions, and encouraged the thoughtful presentation of concerns. His leadership rested on a balance of firmness and humility. He often met privately with abbots, bishops, and trusted advisors to refine decisions before presenting them to the broader assembly. These quiet meetings took place in modest chambers warmed by small fires. The Pope would sit with scrolls, letters, and reports, speaking softly with those around him. Delegates described Urban's presence as calming. His steady voice and patient listening reassured those who worried about division. His methodical approach guided the council without creating tension. Reform measures reaffirmed with clarity and care. At Clermont, Urban reinforced the reform measures that had shaped his papacy from its earliest days. To ensure clarity, he addressed each major point with slow, deliberate explanation. These included forbidding clergy from holding offices obtained through payment, insisting on proper elections for bishops and abbots, confirming the independence of monastic houses, strengthening the discipline of married priests who resisted reform, clarifying the role of bishops in local disputes, reaffirming the Church's authority over spiritual matters. Urban did not present these decisions with harshness. He framed each measure as a step toward purification, unity, and moral renewal. The council welcomed his guidance. The petition from the East, a quiet seed takes root. During the sessions at Clermont, Urban revisited the appeal that had arrived months earlier from the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos. The emperor had requested Western support against the Seljuk Turks. The fall of important cities in Asia Minor and attacks on pilgrims created a growing concern. Urban had not acted impulsively at Piacenza. He took months to reflect, to pray, and to consider the spiritual and political implications of a response. Now, at Clermont, he sensed that the time had come to address the matter. Before the largest gathering of the council, Urban spoke calmly about the suffering of Eastern Christians, the dangers faced by pilgrims, the spiritual duty of the Western Church, the need for unity across Christendom, the potential for renewal through collective action. He invited his listeners to consider the situation not as a distant political issue, but as a shared burden within the universal Christian community. His voice remained steady. His tone remained pastoral. Nothing in his speech felt rushed or dramatic. He offered a path that combined compassion, duty, and spiritual purpose. This moment, though presented with calm dignity, would echo far into the future. The call to action, a measured appeal to the faithful. Urban's appeal at Clermont became known for inspiring what would later become the First Crusade. Yet the tone of his speech was not fiery. It was deliberate, reflective, and grounded in pastoral concern. He called on the faithful to help protect Eastern Christians and restore safe passage to holy sites. He emphasized spiritual renewal, self-sacrifice, and unity. He invited repentance, humility, and charity. He reminded listeners that those who undertook such a journey should do so peacefully and with sincere devotion. The response from the audience was heartfelt. Many were moved by his gentle clarity. They sensed the sincerity of his concern. Yet Urban did not rush to interpret their enthusiasm. He allowed the council sessions to continue with their usual rhythm, returning to matters of reform and governance. Organizing the aftermath, slow, careful structure. After delivering his appeal, Urban spent days meeting privately with bishops and nobles. He sought to ensure that any future actions would be structured and disciplined. He emphasized that leaders should guide volunteers. He wanted protection for the poor. He wished for orderly organization rather than chaos. These quiet meetings reflected his temperament. Even at moments that would shape the medieval world, Urban moved thoughtfully, preferring stability over excitement. The council concludes a blending of reform and renewal. As the council drew to a close, delegates prepared to return to their regions. They carried with them renewed commitment to reform, appreciation for Urban's calm leadership, clearer guidance on clerical discipline, a unified sense of purpose, instructions to support the cause presented by the Byzantine envoys. Clermont ended not with noise, but with steady resolve. The church left the gathering stronger than it had been in many years. A sleep-friendly closing evening in Clermont. Picture the outskirts of Clermont at dusk, shortly after the council adjourns for the day. The air carries the crispness of late autumn. Lamps glow softly along narrow streets. Delegates walk in small groups, speaking quietly. A distant church bell rings, its tone gentle and steady. Urban too stands near the entrance of a monastery, watching the sky fade from pale gold to deep blue. He feels a sense of peace. The council has brought clarity. The church has moved closer to unity. He breathes slowly, grateful for the progress. Let this tranquil image invite rest as Part 10 comes to a gentle close. Part 11. Urban II after Clermont, guiding a rising movement with calm hands and patient discipline. When the Council of Clermont concluded, Pope Urban II found himself at a delicate turning point. The council had achieved its goals of reaffirming reform and strengthening unity, yet the appeal he issued for aid to the Byzantine Empire had awakened a powerful response across Christendom. Word of his speech spread swiftly through towns, villages, monasteries, and noble courts. People spoke of pilgrimage, of service, and of the spiritual renewal that might come from answering the call. Despite the growing enthusiasm, Urban did not rush into new declarations. Instead, he approached the aftermath of Clermont with the same steady, thoughtful manner that had shaped his entire papacy. He recognized that it was not enough to inspire. He needed to guide. He needed to ensure that the energy created by the appeal would remain grounded in spiritual clarity, pastoral care, and careful organization. This chapter gently explores Urban's actions in the months following Clermont. We move slowly through his deliberate decisions, his quiet movements across France, and his efforts to transform a rising movement into something orderly and spiritually meaningful. Settle in, breathe softly, and allow this chapter to unfold with the same calming rhythm as the ones before it. Leaving Clermont, a pope traveling with quiet purpose. When Urban departed Clermont, he did not leave as the leader of a grand campaign. He left as a shepherd. His pace was unhurried. He traveled with a modest entourage. The roads were cold and often muddy, softened by the rains of late autumn. The breath of horses curled in the air. Trees were bare. Villagers paused from their work to greet the Pope as he passed. Urban carried with him letters written by bishops during the council, reports from various monastic houses, messages for rulers throughout France, notes for his next councils, reflections on the response to his appeal. He rode with a deep sense of responsibility. The council had planted a seed. Now he needed to nurture it slowly and with great care. Urban's gentle clarification of his call. As word of his appeal spread, many people interpreted it in different ways. Some saw it as a chance for adventure. Others understood it as a deeply spiritual act. Some thought it was aimed solely at knights, while others believed it was meant for all Christians. Urban responded with pastoral patience. He wrote letters clarifying that the journey should be undertaken with sincere devotion. Leaders should guide participants with discipline. Disputes among nobles should be set aside. Pilgrims should travel peacefully. The goal was protection and support of Eastern Christians. The Church would offer spiritual benefits for those who participated faithfully. These clarifications did not attempt to dampen the growing enthusiasm. Instead, they shaped it gently, ensuring that spiritual purpose remained at the center. Visits to monasteries and churches, steadying the movement. Urban continued his earlier pattern of travel. He moved through regions of France that had shaped his life, visiting monasteries, parishes, and gatherings of clergy. He listened to concerns about the appeal. He reassured those who feared disorder. He encouraged those who sought spiritual guidance. He reminded everyone that the Church's goal was renewal, not chaos. Monasteries, in particular, became centers of organization. Urban encouraged abbots to preach the spiritual meaning of pilgrimage, offer hospitality to travelers, help local clergy understand the Pope's message, emphasize prayer and repentance, protect vulnerable members of their communities. The monks responded with humility and dedication. Their chapels echoed with prayer for peace, unity, and guidance. Their steady presence supported Urban's vision of a movement guided not by excitement but by spiritual discipline. Letters to bishops, calm instruction for a growing response. Urban wrote extensively to bishops across Europe after Clermont. His letters carried a quiet authority. They outlined responsibilities, clarified expectations, and encouraged cooperation. He offered guidance rather than commands. In these letters, Urban emphasized the need for bishops to preach about spiritual renewal, careful preparation for pilgrims, avoiding exploitation or coercion, ensuring that disputes were resolved peacefully, maintaining unity within the Church, supporting the poor who wish to join the journey, discouraging unstructured or impulsive attempts to depart. Bishops appreciated his clarity. Many had witnessed tensions between nobles or unrest within their dioceses. Urban's gentle consistency helped them navigate uncertain circumstances. Urban's relationship with French nobility, diplomacy through patience. As interest in the appeal grew, many nobles began contacting Urban or his representatives. They sought to understand their roles, responsibilities, and the expectations placed upon them. Some offered their support immediately. Others asked for clarification about land rights, protection of families, or the legitimacy of their leadership. Urban approached these conversations calmly. He reminded nobles that the journey was not a political undertaking. It was a spiritual commitment. He emphasized the importance of humility, the need for cooperation, peaceful conduct, protection of vulnerable travelers, avoiding personal disputes, maintaining loyalty to the Church. Urban's diplomacy softened tensions among nobles who were historically rivals. His emphasis on unity created a sense of shared purpose, strengthening communication with the Byzantine Empire. Urban understood that his appeal could not exist in isolation. It required careful coordination with the Byzantine Emperor, whose envoys had sparked the initiative months earlier. Although communication across such distances was slow, Urban worked patiently to maintain contact. He sent messages that reaffirmed Western support, requested information about conditions in the East, sought clarification about Byzantine needs, reassured the emperor of the papacy's intentions, encouraged collaboration between the Eastern and Western churches. Urban's approach was diplomatic and respectful. He recognized the significance of creating trust between two traditions that had experienced tension for centuries. His calm tone helped preserve goodwill. Urban's preaching tour, encouraging spiritual renewal. After Clermont, Urban undertook a preaching journey through parts of France. His sermons were not fiery or dramatic. They were measured, thoughtful, and focused on spiritual reform. He reminded listeners of the need for repentance, charity, unity within communities, peace between families, moral discipline, prayerful preparation. He encouraged people to focus not on the outward act of pilgrimage alone, but on the inward transformation it represented. His gentle voice carried across fields, courtyards, and church interiors, offering comfort to those uncertain about the future. Monks who accompanied him described his preaching as calm and clear. His listeners left feeling strengthened, not overwhelmed. Maintaining focus on reform, the papacy's quiet foundation. Despite growing attention toward the appeal made at Clermont, Urban never lost sight of his larger mission. Reform remained the foundation of his papacy. He continued to appoint bishops loyal to reform, settle disputes with patient negotiation, encourage discipline among clergy, strengthen monastic independence, support communities seeking moral renewal. For Urban, the success of any larger movement depended on the spiritual health of the Church itself. Reform and renewal were inseparable. A sleep-friendly closing, Urban II by the fire at night. Imagine Pope Urban II resting in a small chamber within a monastery after a long day of preaching. The room is lit only by a quiet fire. Shadows move softly across the walls. A quill rests beside a parchment on a wooden table. Outside, the sound of distant voices fades as monks settle into their cells for the night. Urban sits beside the fire, deep in thought, yet calm. He reflects on the day's conversations. He considers the responsibilities ahead. He prays for wisdom and peace. The fire crackles gently. The room feels warm and safe. He breathes slowly, letting the stillness settle. Let this image invite calmness into your mind as Part 11 comes to a peaceful close. Part 12. Urban II and the Pilgrims, guiding the first departures with pastoral calm and quiet discipline. As months passed after the Council of Clermont, the spiritual movement that Pope Urban II had nurtured with such care began to take visible form. Across France, Italy, the German lands, and parts of the Low Countries, groups of pilgrims started preparing for departure. Many were inspired by genuine devotion. Some were uncertain but hopeful. Others were motivated by a desire for reconciliation with God. Still others sought to answer what they believed was a sacred calling. Urban watched this developing movement with a mixture of hope and quiet concern. He knew that pilgrimage, especially one of such length and difficulty, required careful guidance. He understood that large groups of travelers could create disorder if left without structure. He recognized that expectations needed to be clarified, and that spiritual meaning had to remain at the center of everything. Part 12 explores Urban's gentle efforts to guide the first waves of pilgrims, stabilize their preparations, and preserve the spiritual integrity of a movement that was rapidly growing. It is a peaceful chapter, rooted in reflection and pastoral care. Take a slow breath. Allow the words to unfold with soft clarity. The rising tide of pilgrims. A movement larger than expected. In the early months of 1096, crowds began gathering in towns, villages, and monasteries. These were not the formal armies that would later develop. They were ordinary Christians, from farmers to artisans, from widows to young nobles, from monks to former soldiers. Urban had not expected the response to be so rapid. Nor had he expected so many people to begin traveling even before formal leaders had been chosen. Yet he understood that once spiritual momentum takes hold, it moves quietly but powerfully through communities. Reports reached him of families selling belongings to finance their journeys, priests blessing small groups before they departed, monks providing food and guidance, local lords struggling to maintain order, people gathering at crossroads and marketplaces, sermons inspiring spontaneous departures. Urban responded not with alarm, but with thoughtful attention. His tone remained calm. His actions remained deliberate. Urban's efforts to slow and stabilize early departures. Urban believed deeply in the spiritual value of pilgrimage. Yet he also knew that impulsive departures could lead to confusion, danger, and misdirection. Many regions were unprepared for large crowds of travelers. Supplies were limited. Roads were unpredictable. Without coordination, the movement risked losing its spiritual purpose. To gently stabilize the situation, Urban encouraged bishops to instruct people to wait for trained leaders, ensure proper pastoral preparation, discourage unplanned departures, focus on confession and reconciliation, protect vulnerable individuals, emphasize prayer and discipline. Urban's letters reminded clergy that a holy purpose required thoughtful action. His guidance helped slow some of the early movements, though others continued despite caution. Monasteries as centers of preparation and calm. Throughout medieval Europe, monasteries served as centers of spiritual and practical organization. Urban relied heavily on these quiet communities to support and guide the first pilgrims. Monasteries offered safe lodging, reliable food supplies, copies of scripture for reflection, spaces for confession, sermons explaining the meaning of pilgrimage, maps and descriptions of known routes, experienced brothers who had traveled before. Urban saw monasteries as sanctuaries of stability. He encouraged abbots to maintain a peaceful atmosphere for those preparing to depart. In many places, monks prayed continuously for the safety and spiritual clarity of the travelers. Imagine the scene: a group of pilgrims gathered in a cloister courtyard. Some sit beneath archways, whispering quiet prayers. Others speak softly with monks. The sound of chanting rises gently from the chapel. This calm preparation reflects Urban's pastoral vision. Urban's legates. Gentle supervisors of a growing movement. Urban could not personally oversee the movement of thousands of people. Instead, he appointed trusted legates to guide the early stages of departure. These men were bishops and abbots known for their discipline and spiritual maturity. Their tasks included clarifying Urban's instructions, helping establish leadership among groups, resolving disputes calmly, encouraging the poor and vulnerable, preventing violence or disorder, reinforcing the spiritual meaning of the journey, preparing reports to send back to Urban. Legates traveled through France and Italy, visiting towns where pilgrims gathered. Their presence reassured communities that the Church was guiding events with care. Urban received their reports with patience. He used the information to refine his instructions to bishops and abbots. His leadership remained consistent and quietly attentive. A spiritual journey, not a military campaign. Urban had always emphasized the spiritual nature of the movement. Yet as interest grew, some individuals began speaking of it in more worldly terms. Nobles occasionally framed it as a military venture. Merchants saw opportunities for travel and trade. Some spoke carelessly about conquest. Urban responded firmly but gently. Through sermons, letters, and legates, he reminded Christians that the journey was a pilgrimage. Humility mattered more than victory. Charity was required. Violence must be controlled. Repentance was essential. Participants must prepare their souls. The Church did not endorse greed or reckless ambition. These repeated reminders helped preserve the spiritual tone that Urban believed essential for true renewal. Urban's visits to key leaders, quiet conversations that shaped the future. As more nobles expressed interest in leading organized groups, Urban visited them or invited them to meet with him. These meetings took place in monasteries, episcopal residences, or quiet chambers away from crowded streets. Urban's conversations with these leaders emphasized unity among commanders, respect for the Byzantine Empire, protection of the poor along the journey, the need for priests to accompany travelers, disciplined conduct at all times, avoidance of local conflicts in Europe, peaceful relations with communities along the route. He spoke calmly, offering guidance that blended spiritual wisdom with practical insight. These conversations shaped the leadership structures that would soon take form. Pilgrims and their emotions, Urban's pastoral sensitivity. Reports reached Urban not only about the movement of pilgrims, but also about their emotional state. Many were filled with hope. Some were fearful. Others were grieving losses that motivated their journeys. Some struggled with doubts about whether they were worthy. Urban treated these emotional realities with deep pastoral sensitivity. He knew that a pilgrimage of such length was not only a physical journey, but a spiritual one. His letters emphasized trust in divine guidance, the healing power of confession, the importance of traveling with pure intention, the value of prayer in times of fear, the blessings given to those who sought forgiveness, patience with oneself and others. These themes resonated widely. Priests read Urban's letters aloud in churches. Monks copied them carefully. Pilgrims carried them as reminders of spiritual purpose. Urban's vision of peaceful departure. By early spring of 1096, many groups of pilgrims were preparing to depart formally. Urban hoped that their leave-taking would reflect peace rather than chaos. He encouraged communities to hold prayer vigils, offer blessings from local clergy, gather in churchyards for quiet services, send travelers onward with gentle encouragement, maintain harmony after their departure. Some towns organized small processions led by priests holding crosses. Others held solemn masses. Bells rang softly as groups walked away along sunlit or snow-covered roads. Urban received news of these moments with gratitude. He saw in them a sign that the Church was moving toward renewal. A sleep-friendly closing, Urban too watching the first pilgrims depart. Picture Pope Urban II standing on a hillside near a small French town in the early morning. mist drifts gently across the fields. A group of pilgrims passes along a dirt road below, walking slowly and quietly. Priests offer blessings. Children clutch small wooden crosses. Older travelers lean on staffs. The light is soft, filtered by the rising sun. Urban watches them with a calm expression. He does not feel triumph. He feels responsibility. He prays silently for their safety, their spiritual growth, and their peaceful conduct. The scene is gentle. Horses move quietly. The sound of footsteps blends with birdsong. Urban remains still for several moments, letting the light warm his face. Let this peaceful image accompany you into rest as Part 12 softly concludes. Part 13. Urban 2 and the shaping of leadership, quiet conversations, careful appointments, and the gentle formation of the first crusading lords. By the time spring of 1096 approached, the spiritual movement that Pope Urban II had nurtured with such steady hands was beginning to evolve into something more structured. What had started as a wave of spontaneous devotion, shaped by sermons, prayers, and the desire for reconciliation, now required careful leadership. Groups of pilgrims needed guidance not only in their spiritual preparation, but also in the practical realities of long travel. Families needed reassurance. Clergy needed direction. Nobles who felt compelled to lead needed clear expectations. Urban understood that leadership mattered. Without thoughtful structure, the movement could become scattered, confused, or vulnerable to those who might use it for personal gain. Yet Urban also understood that leadership could not be imposed suddenly. It needed to emerge through gentle encouragement, quiet conversations, and the recognition of individuals whose character reflected both discipline and humility. Part 13 explores this delicate work. It is a softly unfolding chapter filled with private meetings, thoughtful deliberation, and the calm formation of a leadership framework that would guide many thousands of travelers. Let your breath settle and allow the story to rise gently around you. Urban's philosophy of leadership. Guided by spirit, shaped by humility. Urban II believed deeply that spiritual leadership required humility, patience, and a readiness to serve. He did not want the movement to be dominated by ambition or rivalry. He hoped that those who stepped forward would understand the gravity of their role and lead with compassion. Urban looked for leaders who embodied calm judgment, spiritual sincerity, cooperation with clergy, commitment to discipline, willingness to protect the vulnerable, a desire for unity rather than glory. He saw leadership not as an honor, but as a burden carried for the good of others. This belief guided every decision he made as he began shaping the movement's early organization. Private meetings in quiet monastic chambers. Urban spent much of early 1096 traveling between monasteries and episcopal residences. It was in these quiet places that he held his most important discussions. The scenes were peaceful. A modest chamber warmed by a small fire. Simple wooden tables covered in parchment. Lamps flickering against stone walls. The distant sound of monks chanting evening prayers. The Pope seated with a handful of advisors. Noblemen arriving with modest entourages. Conversation spoken softly, without urgency. Urban listened more than he spoke. He asked each potential leader about his intentions, his readiness, his spiritual state, and his understanding of the responsibilities ahead. These meetings often stretched late into the night, each one shaped by careful discernment. Identifying suitable leaders, the quiet emergence of a core group. Urban did not choose leaders in a single moment. Instead, he observed the movement's natural developments. Certain noble families had influence across regions. Certain knights held reputations for discipline. Certain monks were widely respected for their wisdom. Urban allowed these natural strengths to guide his decisions. Individuals who gradually emerged as leaders included men of noble birth with established lands, knights with experience in protecting travelers, nobles known for piety, men whose families had a tradition of service, individuals respected for fairness and cooperation. Urban did not announce these roles loudly. Instead, he encouraged nobles privately to take responsibility for organizing and caring for those who would travel with them. Through this gentle approach, leadership took shape naturally. Urban's expectations for noble leaders. Urban made his expectations clear in his conversations with potential leaders. He did not focus on military strategy. Instead, he emphasized moral and pastoral responsibilities. His expectations included guiding travelers peacefully, avoiding unnecessary violence, protecting the poor, the elderly, and families, supporting priests who accompanied the journey, cooperating with other leaders, resolving disputes gently, maintaining discipline, remembering the spiritual purpose of the journey. These expectations were rooted in Urban's belief that leaders must create harmony rather than conflict. The role of clergy, spiritual anchors for the travelers. Urban placed strong emphasis on the role of priests and monks who would accompany travelers. He believed that every group needed spiritual guidance as much as worldly leadership. Clergy were instructed to hear confessions frequently, lead prayers morning and evening, remind travelers of their vows, encourage peace among members, discourage sinful behavior, support leaders with counsel, protect the dignity of worship along the route. Urban knew that the journey could be difficult emotionally and physically. Priests provided stability, offering spiritual comfort during hardships. The challenge of enthusiastic but unprepared leaders. Not everyone who wished to lead was suited for the role. Some individuals approached Urban with great enthusiasm but lacked discipline or spiritual maturity. Others sought leadership out of ambition rather than devotion. Urban handled these situations with gentleness but firmness. He often encouraged such individuals to join the pilgrimage under another leader, spend more time in spiritual preparation, resolve local disputes before departing, seek the guidance of clergy, travel quietly rather than command others. Urban used these conversations to protect the movement's integrity without humiliating anyone. Organizing departure points, bringing order to the early movements. As leadership structures became clearer, Urban encouraged bishops to establish organized departure points. These were locations where travelers could gather, receive blessings, and begin their journey under proper guidance. Departure points were usually cathedral towns, major monasteries, fortified towns with ample supplies, regions with experienced clergy. Urban believed that orderly departures would help maintain peace and prevent confusion. He encouraged communities to offer hospitality, prayers, and encouragement as pilgrims began their long journey. Urban's gentle coordination with secular rulers. Throughout his leadership efforts, Urban maintained respectful and thoughtful relationships with secular rulers. Some offered support. Others expressed concern that so many people were leaving their lands. Some worried about the absence of knights who maintained regional security. Urban responded with calm diplomacy. He reassured rulers that the movement was spiritually grounded. Leadership was being organized carefully. Disorder would be prevented as much as possible. The church sought peace both at home and abroad. Their lands would not be left entirely unprotected. These conversations required great patience. Urban believed that cooperation with secular rulers was essential to the movement's stability. Urban's commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Among the pilgrims, many were not trained fighters. They were farmers, craftsmen, widows, and families with children. Urban emphasized repeatedly that leaders must protect these individuals. He instructed leaders and clergy to prevent exploitation, ensure access to food and shelter, resolve disputes peacefully, protect women and families, watch over the elderly and infirm, offer comfort to those who grew weary. Urban viewed this care as central to the spiritual purpose of the pilgrimage. Protecting the vulnerable was not optional. It was foundational. A sleep-friendly closing, Urban II in a quiet garden at twilight. Imagine Pope Urban II walking slowly through a monastery garden at twilight after a long day of private meetings. The sky is dusky purple. Small lamps glow beneath archways. The scent of herbs drifts through the cool air. A fountain trickles softly in the center of the courtyard. Urban moves with unhurried steps. He reflects quietly on the conversations he held, the leaders he encouraged, and the responsibilities that lie ahead. He pauses near a bench shaded by a fig tree, listening to the faint melodies of evening chants rising from the chapel. The world feels peaceful and still. Urban breathes deeply, letting the calm settle around him. Let this gentle image rest in your mind as Part 13 comes to a quiet close. Part 14. Urban II and the shaping of Europe's spiritual imagination, preachers, pilgrims, and the quiet spreading of a unified message. By the middle of 1096, the spiritual movement that had begun at Clermont was no longer confined to towns or monasteries. It had spread across fields, along quiet roads, and through the settled rhythms of everyday life. People spoke of the pilgrimage in marketplaces, at wells, in the courtyards of manor houses, and beside hearth fires where families gathered at night. Priests mentioned it in sermons. Monks prayed for its success during their liturgical hours. Children whispered about it as they played. Widows asked clergy how they might participate. Knights spoke about vows in calm conversations beneath castle towers. All of Europe seemed touched by a sense of collective spiritual awakening. It moved gently, almost like a change in the seasons, steady and subtle, yet unmistakable. Pope Urban II did not lead this wave through dramatic commands. Instead, he cultivated it through patient communication, pastoral guidance, and consistent reminders of the movement's spiritual foundation. His leadership in these months rested not on the strength of armies, but on the power of carefully shaped teaching. What he built was not an institution alone. It was a shared imagination, a unified sense of purpose that linked distant villages to great cathedrals and humble families to noble estates. Part 14 explores the quiet ways Urban helped this message spread, the preachers who carried it, the communities that received it, and the spiritual tone that shaped Europe in the months before the main departures began. Settle in gently. Allow the quiet rhythm of the story to ease your mind. The growth of preachers, voices that carried Urban's vision. Urban knew that local clergy held great influence over how people understood spiritual messages. Priests interpreted scripture for their congregations. Monks taught through example and preaching. bishops guided regions through pastoral letters. Urban recognized that his appeal would be carried not by a single voice, but by many. He encouraged bishops across Europe to select trustworthy priests and monks who could travel within their regions and share the message of the pilgrimage with clarity and compassion. These preachers were instructed to emphasize prayer and repentance, humility rather than excitement, spiritual renewal rather than ambition, charity toward the poor, patience with family responsibilities, the importance of peace within communities. Urban reminded them that their purpose was not to stir frenzy, but to guide people toward thoughtful commitment. They were to strengthen faith, not provoke disorder. Many of these preachers had spent years in monastic silence, studying scripture and learning the rhythms of prayer. When they spoke, their voices were calm, steady, and deeply grounded in spiritual experience. They preached in village squares, beneath the shade of trees, beside parish churches, and in small gatherings after Sunday Mass. Their words moved through communities like soft ripples across still water. The tone of Urban's message, gentle, reflective, and focused on inner change. Unlike some preachers in later centuries who used fiery or emotional language, Urban's guidance always emphasized calm reflection. His letters encouraged a tone of quiet seriousness. He wanted people to understand the pilgrimage as a path toward purification, healing, and reconciliation. The themes he encouraged preachers to emphasize included the longing for peace among Christian communities, the healing of family disputes before departure, forgiveness and reconciliation, the value of caring for neighbors, the importance of preparing one's soul, simplicity and humility in travel, unity across regions and social classes. Urban did not want the movement to become defined by excitement alone. He wanted it to become a time of inner transformation. This gentle focus shaped how Europe understood the events. In many places, preparing for pilgrimage felt like a prolonged spiritual retreat. People confessed old sins. Families repaired strained relationships. Communities gathered in prayer. The calm tone shaped the emotional landscape of entire regions. Pilgrims preparing in villages and towns, quiet movements of faith. While nobles prepared with larger entourages and resources, most pilgrims came from ordinary backgrounds. They were farmers, millers, carpenters, shepherds, and artisans. Their lives were shaped by the seasons. They prepared for the journey slowly, often during the quiet hours after work was done or early in the morning before chores. Their preparations included repairing shoes and simple clothing, gathering food for the first days of travel, constructing walking staffs, sewing small pouches for personal belongings, visiting parish priests for confession, attending special masses, arranging care for fields or livestock, entrusting children or elders to neighbors. Urban knew that pilgrimage placed great demands on families. He encouraged clergy to support those who remained behind. This ensured that communities stayed peaceful and that anxiety did not overwhelm those who were preparing to depart. The influence of monasteries. Centers of calm and spiritual strength. Monasteries continued to play a vital role in shaping the movement. They served as places for pilgrims to rest, pray, and receive spiritual guidance. Many monasteries organized quiet prayer vigils, where monks prayed for protection, unity, and spiritual purity among those preparing to depart. Urban communicated regularly with abbots, encouraging them to support local clergy, provide spaces for instruction, Help coordinate travelers peacefully. Maintain charitable outreach. Offer spiritual direction to leaders and families. In many regions, monasteries became the heart of local preparation. Their bell towers marked the hours. Their chants formed the spiritual background of entire villages. Their calm discipline helped communities remain balanced during a time of great change. Urban's continued letters, a steady voice heard across Europe. Urban continued writing letters throughout these months. His correspondence flowed from monasteries, episcopal residences, and the small rooms where he rested during his travels. His letters often included reminders about moral discipline, encouragement for clergy facing challenges, clarifications about expectations, warnings against disorder, blessings for communities preparing to send travelers, expressions of pastoral concern for the poor, instructions for those organizing resources. These letters circulated widely. Priests read them aloud to congregations. Monks copied them into manuscripts. Nobles consulted them when making decisions. Urban's calm voice reached Europe through parchment and ink, guiding hearts and shaping decisions from a distance. The role of women in preparation, quiet strength and devotion. Women played a profound role in the preparation of the movement. Many sought to join the pilgrimage themselves. Others supported husbands, children, or parents who chose to leave. Their efforts sustained the spiritual tone that Urban encouraged. Women prepared clothing and bedding for travelers, preserved food for early stages of the journey, small wooden crosses to be carried for protection, letters or tokens to send with loved ones, quiet blessings spoken in whispered prayers. Urban recognized their spiritual contributions, though indirectly. His letters often addressed all the faithful, signaling his awareness that the movement touched entire households. Women shaped the emotional landscape of departure through their patience, strength, and devotion. Urban's constant reminder, peace at home before the journey. One of Urban's most repeated teachings during this period was the need for peace at home. He urged that no one depart while harboring anger, resentment, or unresolved conflicts. The journey, in his view, required a clear heart. He encouraged reconciliation between feuding families, forgiveness between spouses, peace between nobles and vassals, restitution for past harms, calm acceptance of responsibilities left behind. Urban believed that inner peace created outer harmony. His insistence on this theme helped many communities enter the coming months with a sense of calm balance. A sleep-friendly closing, Urban II listening to evening bells. Picture Pope Urban II standing outside a monastery on a clear evening in early summer of 1096. The sky glows with soft colors. Fields stretch quietly into the distance. In the valley below, he can see the faint movement of pilgrims gathered in small groups, speaking in low voices. The monastery bells ring gently, their sound drifting across the landscape. Urban listens with a calm expression. He feels the weight of responsibility, but he also senses the slow, steady ripening of the spiritual movement he has guided. The air grows cooler. Stars emerge. From the chapel comes the soft sound of monks chanting the final prayers of the night. Urban closes his eyes, letting the stillness wash over him. Let this peaceful scene settle gently into your thoughts as Part 14 draws to a quiet close. Part 15. Urban II and the summer of 1096, quiet supervision, emerging leaders, and the first major departures. By the summer of 1096, the spiritual movement encouraged by Pope Urban II had grown into a broad, peaceful tide of preparation across Europe. Families prayed together in the evenings. Monks chanted for safe passage. Priests guided parishioners through confession and reconciliation. Noble households organized supplies and prepared their lands for times of absence. Children watched as groups of travelers passed along dusty roads at dawn. Communities felt suspended between daily life and something larger that was slowly taking shape. Urban, observing all of this from monasteries, episcopal residences, and the quiet chambers where he reviewed letters, understood that the movement had reached a new stage. Earlier months were filled with reflection, spiritual preparation, and gentle teaching. Now, travelers were beginning to depart in larger numbers. Leadership structures were forming. Regional forces were slowly gathering under the guidance of nobles whose roles had been shaped through long conversations with the Pope. Part 15 explores how Urban accompanied this new stage of development, not through dramatic commands, but through steady supervision, pastoral encouragement, and calm direction. It is a chapter of slow movement, thoughtful oversight, and the increasingly organized emergence of the first major groups of pilgrims. Allow your breath to soften. Let the story unfold with the quiet rhythm of a warm summer evening. Urban's observations, the movement settles into structure. During the early weeks of summer in 1096, Urban received frequent reports from clergy and lay leaders across France, Italy, and the German regions. Messengers traveled long distances with letters tied carefully in leather pouches. They described groups gathering near cathedrals, families making final preparations, monks organizing prayer services, small clusters of pilgrims traveling ahead of the larger departures, the mood of towns and villages, the concerns of local rulers. Urban read each report carefully. His responses were always measured. He celebrated signs of spiritual maturity. He gently addressed signs of disorder. He reminded clergy that their responsibilities were rooted in patience and pastoral care. Through these reports, Urban saw the beginnings of a movement that was no longer experimental or uncertain, but structured and steady. The movement that had spread quietly through sermons and whispered prayers was now becoming outwardly visible across Europe. The first large departures, calm movements across the landscape. By midsummer, the earliest organized groups began departing under the guidance of recognized leaders. These were not yet the formal contingents led by Europe's major nobles. Instead, they were mid-sized groups guided by lesser nobles, experienced knights, and respected clergy. They moved slowly, often walking with staff in hand, carrying modest bundles, and traveling with families. Urban encouraged bishops to organize blessings for these groups. Many bishops held quiet ceremonies in churchyards or fields outside city walls. Pilgrims stood in close circles, listening to prayers for protection, unity, and spiritual clarity. Some cried softly as they said goodbye to families who would remain behind. Others stood in reflective silence, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. These departures were peaceful. Urban received news of them with gratitude. They reflected the spiritual tone he had encouraged so carefully. Urban's continued influence through letters. Urban wrote constantly during this period. His letters served as the spiritual framework for the entire movement. They traveled farther than he could personally reach, crossing fields, mountain passes, rivers, and small market towns. In these letters, Urban reminded clergy and leaders that the movement must remain peaceful. Disputes should be settled before departure. Prayer and confession remain essential. Travelers should support one another. Clergy leading groups must avoid harshness. Noblemen must protect the weak. The elderly and children needed special care. These letters were read aloud in churches and monasteries. They shaped the moral atmosphere of the journey even as groups moved farther from their homelands. Urban's focus on cooperation between leaders. Urban understood that the movement involved people from many regions with different customs and traditions. To prevent rivalry or confusion, he encouraged leaders to meet one another, speak calmly, and agree on shared principles. He advised them to coordinate routes, avoid competing for resources, decide on peaceful solutions to disagreements, maintain communication with clergy, protect other groups when crossing difficult regions. Urban hoped that the movement would foster unity across regions. His emphasis on cooperation helped avoid tensions among groups preparing to depart. Monasteries and churches along the routes, sanctuaries of rest. Throughout the summer, monasteries along the anticipated routes opened their doors to travelers. These religious houses became essential to the stability of the movement. Monks offered simple meals, clean water, places to sleep, long hours of prayer, spiritual counsel, guidance on safe paths, support for the injured or weary. Urban relied on monasteries as spiritual anchors. Their quiet discipline provided structure wherever travelers passed. In many places, pilgrims paused for several days to gather strength before continuing. Urban's encouragement of monastic involvement helped ensure that even the earliest stages of travel remained grounded in peace. Urban's conversations with major leaders, calming ambition, encouraging responsibility. While early groups were already departing, Urban also met quietly with major nobles who would lead later contingents. These meetings were private and dignified. They took place in small ecclesiastical chambers rather than grand halls. Urban preferred simple surroundings where conversation could be focused and spiritual. During these discussions, Urban emphasized humility in leadership, cooperation with other nobles, respect for both clergy and Byzantine authorities, the need to protect the poor, discipline among followers, proper behavior in foreign lands, avoidance of personal feuds. Urban's tone was calm. His guidance was steady. He hoped to shape leaders whose influence would help maintain peace as the movement continued. The emotional landscape of Europe, a quiet mixture of hope and uncertainty. In many towns, there was a sense of mixed emotion. Families felt pride when loved ones chose to depart, yet they also felt fear for their safety. Children looked up to the travelers with wonder. Priests offered comfort to those who remained. Markets buzzed gently with quiet conversations about departures, blessings, and prayers. Urban knew that emotions could shape the movement as much as leadership. His letters often included words of comfort for families, blessings offered to those staying behind, prayers for protection, reminders that spiritual support can be offered from a distance, encouragement to maintain peace in the community, assurances that the Church valued every person, not only travelers. This pastoral sensitivity helped families navigate the emotional weight of the summer departures. Urban's attention to safety and order. Urban understood that the movement could face dangers. He reminded leaders that travelers should not rely on force. Local laws must be respected. Supplies must be handled fairly. Roads should be shared peacefully. Clergy should counsel against greed. Disputes must be settled with calmness. His emphasis on safety was practical and spiritual. Urban believed that peaceful conduct reflected the sincerity of the movement. A sleep-friendly closing, Urban II watching summer fields at dusk. Imagine Pope Urban II standing at the edge of a monastery courtyard in the late evening of a warm summer day. The sky is soft gold fading into a quiet blue. Fireflies drift above tall grass. A small group of travelers walks along a distant road, their shapes outlined gently against the fading light. Urban watches them with stillness. He listens to the distant sounds of monks chanting in the chapel behind him. The air is warm and calm. He folds his hands and whispers a prayer for their safety. The setting sun casts long shadows across the landscape. The moment feels suspended, quiet, and deeply peaceful. Allow this tranquil image to rest in your thoughts as Part 15 comes to a soft close. Part 16. Urban II and the later summer of 1096, guiding stability, soothing disorder, and preserving the spiritual heart of the movement. As the warm months of 1096 deepened, the movement that Pope Urban II had set gently into motion continued to grow and shift. What had once been a quiet tide of spiritual longing had become a broad landscape of travelers, leaders, clergy, and communities adjusting to the steady flow of departures. Many groups were peaceful and well prepared. They walked slowly along familiar roads, led by experienced clergy and nobles who had listened carefully to Urban's guidance. They prayed together, shared food, and moved with a sense of reverence. Yet other groups were less organized. Some departed too quickly, swept up by emotion rather than careful preparation. Others formed without clear leadership or without the spiritual grounding Urban believed essential. These groups struggled to maintain unity. They sometimes made mistakes that local clergy or rulers needed to address. Urban received many reports of such challenges. Some troubled him. Others inspired him to send new guidance. Part 16 explores how Urban approached this tense and delicate period. His actions remained calm, measured, and grounded in spiritual purpose. Though he could not personally walk with every group, his letters, legates, and pastoral direction shaped the atmosphere of Europe during these months. Let your mind settle gently. Allow this chapter to unfold with the slow rhythm of a quiet summer night. A changing landscape. Early movements give way to larger waves. By late summer, the trickle of departures had grown into something larger. Regions across France, the Rhineland, and northern Italy saw groups of pilgrims forming almost weekly. Many groups were simple families and neighbors traveling with little more than a priest to guide them. Others had the beginnings of formal leadership. Some included experienced fighters. Others were composed mostly of the poor. Urban watched this developing landscape with steady attention. His goals remained constant. Protect the vulnerable. Maintain peaceful conduct. Preserve spiritual tone. Ensure proper leadership. Reduce disorder. Encourage cooperation. Guard against harmful influences. His influence extended across Europe through his legates and letters. Though he could not be in every place, his presence was felt in sermons, in prayers spoken by clergy, and in the quiet instructions given to leaders preparing to depart. Urban's calm response to reports of disorder. Not all reports were reassuring. In some regions, groups left before clergy could prepare them. In other places, travelers struggled to obtain supplies. Some villages were overwhelmed by the arrival of large bands of pilgrims. A few groups grew unruly, acting out of desperation or confusion. Urban never reacted with harshness. His responses were consistently pastoral and patient. He wrote to bishops urging them to offer guidance rather than condemnation, soothe fears rather than inflame tensions, encourage leaders to restore peace, remind communities of their spiritual duties, support the poor and vulnerable, protect local populations from unintended harm. Urban believed strongly that even poorly managed groups deserved compassion. He did not wish anyone to feel abandoned or judged. Instead, he hoped they would be gently redirected towards spiritual clarity. Legates as anchors of calm authority. Urban's legates became increasingly important in these months. These trained bishops and abbots traveled tirelessly through regions where groups gathered. They met with nobles, clergy, and pilgrims. They heard complaints. They offered blessings. They corrected misunderstandings. Their presence often calmed situations that felt tense or uncertain. Urban instructed his legates to speak with humility, listen to grievances patiently, guide without anger, encourage cooperation between groups, mediate disputes between nobles, reinforce the spiritual nature of the movement, act as stable representatives of the papacy. Legates spent long days traveling dusty roads, sleeping in simple lodgings, and reading letters by candlelight. Their service reflected Urban's own character, steady, thoughtful, and compassionate. Urban's focus on the poor, a gentle reminder of divine equity. Urban received many reports describing poor individuals who wished to travel but lacked supplies. Some struggled to find guidance. Others depended on the charity of their communities. Urban valued the presence of the poor within the movement. To him, the pilgrimage should not be restricted to the wealthy or the powerful. He believed that the poor possessed a spiritual richness that could influence the entire journey. His letters encouraged leaders to offer charity without hesitation, protect poor pilgrims from exploitation, include them in prayers and communal meals, allow them space within encampments, prevent benefactors from using them for personal advantage, remind others that poverty did not diminish spiritual worth. Urban saw the pilgrimage as a collective act where rich and poor walked side by side with equal dignity. This emphasis shaped the atmosphere of many groups. The emotional strain on families, Urban's pastoral sensitivity. As more groups departed, the emotional strain on families became evident. Priests wrote to Urban describing wives fearful for husbands, parents grieving separation from sons, elderly relatives uncertain about the future, children confused about why loved ones were leaving. Urban responded with understanding. His letters often included blessings for those who stayed behind, reminding them that prayer binds families across distance. Spiritual merit does not depend on physical travel. Those who remained at home still shared in the purpose. God looked kindly upon those who supported others. Communities could find strength in care for one another. Urban understood that the emotional health of families influenced the stability of entire regions. His guidance offered comfort during a time of widespread uncertainty. The role of priests traveling with pilgrims. Urban relied heavily on priests who agreed to accompany groups. Their duties included leading daily prayers, encouraging peace within the group, hearing confessions, Teaching Scripture. Offering comfort to the weary or frightened. Mediating disputes. Reminding travelers of their spiritual vows. These priests often walked long distances, carrying only simple belongings. They rested when the group rested. They gently corrected behavior that threatened unity. Their presence reassured pilgrims who were far from home. Urban frequently thanked priests in his letters, acknowledging the quiet sacrifices they made. Guiding leaders toward cooperation. As noble leaders continued their preparations, Urban reminded them to act not as independent commanders, but as partners in a shared spiritual journey. He encouraged them to avoid boasting, support one another, share resources when needed, resolve disputes peacefully, act as examples of humility, protect the poor and the weak. Urban wanted leaders to embody the ideals he had preached since the earliest days of his papacy. He hoped their conduct would shape the tone of the entire movement. Urban's sense of the moment, a movement on the threshold. By late summer, Urban understood that the early stage of spiritual preparation was ending. The next stage would involve major departures of organized forces. The movement was approaching a threshold. Much would depend on how the earliest groups behaved. Urban prayed for wisdom each night. He asked God to guide travelers, leaders, clergy, and families. He asked for unity. He asked for strength. He asked for protection for the vulnerable. He asked for peace among communities. Though he could feel the momentum growing, Urban remained calm. His steady spirit shaped the atmosphere of the months that followed. A sleep-friendly closing. Urban II beneath the late summer sky. Imagine Pope Urban II walking alone in a monastery courtyard beneath the late summer sky. The stone beneath his feet still carries warmth from the day. The air is rich with the scent of herbs. A gentle breeze stirs the leaves of fig and olive trees. In the distance, he hears the soft chant of monks preparing for evening prayer. He pauses beside a low wall overlooking a valley. A group of travelers is visible far below, moving slowly along a winding road. Their figures are small in the fading light. Urban watches them silently. His thoughts are calm. His heart is steady. He whispers a quiet prayer, trusting that the seeds of guidance he has planted will bear fruit in time. Let this peaceful moment settle into your thoughts as Part 16 comes to a gentle close. Part 17. Urban II and the autumn of 1096, steadying Europe as the first great waves move eastward. As the long summer of 1096 faded into autumn, Europe entered a season of transition. Roads that had once felt familiar were now shaped by the steady movement of pilgrims. Villages along major routes adjusted to a new rhythm of life. Some mornings began with travelers gathering in churchyards to receive blessings before departing. Other days saw families waving slowly as loved ones disappeared over the horizon. Priests prayed for safe journeys. Monks added special petitions to their evening chant. Children watched from doorways, unsure how to feel about the quiet procession of adults walking east. During this time, Pope Urban II remained a stabilizing presence. His leadership did not rest on being physically near the movement. Instead, it rested on a profound trust in the power of pastoral guidance. He understood that once the first waves of pilgrims began moving steadily toward the east, a new harmony and new challenges would emerge. The early weeks of autumn brought both. Part 17 explores this calm yet pivotal moment. It is a chapter of gentle transitions, thoughtful responses, and Urban's unwavering commitment to spiritual clarity. Allow your breathing to slow. Let the soft rhythm of this chapter carry you deeper into rest. The turning of the season. A shift in Europe's emotional landscape. With the arrival of autumn, the mood across Europe changed subtly. Fields turned golden. Leaves shifted to warm colors. The evenings grew cooler. The familiar agricultural cycle continued, yet the absence of many travelers created a feeling of openness in some communities and lingering ache in others. Urban received letters from priests describing these emotional landscapes. They spoke of families adjusting to quieter homes, villages learning to organize shared responsibilities, concerns about local protection, pride mixed with sadness, moments of spiritual renewal, small ceremonies held for those who remained. Urban read each letter with care. He believed that understanding the emotions of the people was essential to guiding the movement as a whole. Urban's letters of comfort to families and communities. Urban devoted significant attention to comforting families whose loved ones had departed. His letters offered gentle reminders that their support held spiritual value equal to those walking the pilgrimage path. He encouraged clergy to read these letters aloud so that entire communities could hear his words. Urban reminded them that prayer for travelers was a sacred contribution. Maintaining peace at home honored the journey. The spiritual merit of the pilgrimage extended to those who supported it. God watched over both the travelers and the families they left behind. Acts of charity performed at home strengthened the entire movement. These letters helped ease emotional burdens. They reassured parents who feared for their children. They calmed spouses who worried about the length of separation. They comforted elders who wondered whether they would see their family members again. Urban's quiet compassion flowed across Europe through parchment and ink. Urban's guidance for regions experiencing strain. Some regions struggled with the departure of large numbers of travelers. Local economies were disrupted. Labor shortages forced communities to reorganize. Some villages felt unprotected without their younger men. Urban's ability to read these needs with patience shaped his pastoral response. He encouraged bishops to support families through charitable efforts, organize community labor when needed, encourage noble households to protect vulnerable families, promote fair distribution of food, maintain local peace through mediation, help communities avoid despair. Urban believed deeply in the Church's responsibility to care for those who remained behind. His guidance helped soften the challenges that accompanied the large departures. Urban's focus on spiritual continuity. Even as travelers progressed eastward, Urban maintained a strong emphasis on spiritual continuity. He reminded clergy that the movement's purpose rested on repentance, prayer, unity, humility, peace within communities, cooperation between clergy and laity. Through sermons, letters, and councils, he reinforced the idea that the pilgrimage was a collective spiritual undertaking. Those traveling east were part of a broader renewal happening across Europe. Those remaining at home were participants through prayer, charity, and care for their communities. Urban understood that spiritual continuity would support the stability of Europe during the long absence of many travelers. The pilgrims' early movements eastward, quiet reports reach Urban. As autumn progressed, Urban received the first substantial reports describing how the earliest groups were moving through foreign territories. Some traveled peacefully, guided by clergy who encouraged prayer and cooperation. Others faced unexpected challenges, ranging from harsh weather to political tensions in unfamiliar lands. Urban read these reports with a calm and discerning mind. He reflected carefully before writing responses. His letters to legates and bishops emphasized patience during difficulties, strengthening discipline among leaders, maintaining peaceful relations with local populations, protecting the vulnerable, continuing spiritual guidance during travel. Although he was distant from the travelers, Urban's presence remained a steady influence through his written words. Urban's growing role as Europe's spiritual center. With many leaders traveling east, Urban's significance within Europe increased. Rulers and clergy looked to him for stability. Families sought comfort in his letters. Abbeys and cathedrals sought his blessing for continued guidance. Urban continued to mediate disputes among nobles, oversee the appointment of bishops, support monastic reforms, encourage charity toward the poor, clarify church teachings, strengthen unity among regions. His calm leadership held Europe together during a period of widespread movement. A moment of stillness, Urban at prayer. Throughout the autumn of 1096, Urban frequently sought quiet moments in prayer. He would often retreat to a small chapel in whichever monastery or palace offered him shelter. These chapels were usually simple. A stone altar, wooden benches, candles flickering softly, the scent of incense lingering from earlier services. Tall, narrow windows filtering gentle light. Urban prayed for the safety of travelers, the strength of families, unity among leaders, peace in Europe, wisdom for himself, calm hearts and steady minds. Prayer remained the foundation of his leadership. Urban's continued attention to reform. Even as he guided the pilgrimage movement, Urban never set aside the reform agenda that had shaped his papacy from the beginning. He continued reinforcing the independence of churches from secular interference, moral discipline among clergy, proper appointment of bishops, protection of monastic lands, the importance of pastoral care. Urban knew that Europe's spiritual health depended on strong local leadership as much as it depended on the pilgrimage itself. His ability to balance these responsibilities reflected a deep inner steadiness. Autumn councils and regional synods. Urban used the autumn months to encourage regional gatherings of clergy. These smaller councils reviewed moral conduct among clergy, disputes needing resolution, local challenges created by the movement, guidance for families of travelers, implementation of earlier reform decrees. Urban encouraged a peaceful, contemplative tone at these councils. His instructions helped ensure that the Church remained a source of stability across Europe. A sleep-friendly closing, Urban II watching leaves fall in a monastery garden. Imagine Urban II standing in a quiet monastery garden in early autumn. The air is crisp. Leaves fall softly from trees, drifting in slow spirals before settling on the earth. The sky is pale, touched with gentle gold. Monks walk silently along covered walkways, their robes moving faintly with the wind. Urban watches the leaves fall, thinking of the many travelers now far from home, moving across unfamiliar lands. He breathes deeply, sensing both the weight of responsibility and the calm that comes from trust in divine guidance. The only sound is the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of evening chant. Let this peaceful image guide you into rest as Part 17 comes to a quiet close. Part 18. Urban II and the winter of 1096, guiding Europe through cold months, distant journeys, and quiet resolve. As the year 1096 drifted slowly toward winter, Europe entered a season marked by quiet landscapes and cold mornings. Fields that had once been golden in summer now lay bare. Trees stood without leaves, their branches reaching into the pale winter sky. Hearth fires burned earlier each day. Families gathered inside homes to escape the chill. The pace of life slowed, shaped by the rhythm of winter. Yet beneath this stillness, something continued to move throughout Europe. Groups of travelers were far away now, walking through unfamiliar lands or camped beside distant rivers. Families at home prayed for them daily. Monks added special petitions to their liturgies. In some places, news of travelers arrived in the form of passing merchants or returning messengers. In others, communities waited quietly, wondering what the next months would bring. In this cold season, Pope Urban II remained a steady presence. His role had not diminished when the travelers departed. Instead, it shifted gently into one of supervision, comfort, and long-distance guidance. The responsibilities were immense, yet he approached them with the same thoughtful calm that had shaped his entire papacy. Part 18 explores the heart of this winter season, when the world seemed quiet, the roads grew difficult, and Urban's guidance became a source of warmth for those who remained behind. Allow your breath to deepen. Let the gentle rhythm of this chapter rest softly in your mind. The stillness of winter, a Europe waiting in quiet hope. With the arrival of cold weather, the great roads of Europe grew emptier. Snow covered many paths. Icy wind swept across open fields. Markets were quieter, and travel slowed as people turned inward toward home and hearth. Yet everywhere, conversations continued about travelers who had already left. Priests wrote to Urban describing mothers praying each night for sons, fathers lighting candles for children, villagers gathering for shared vigils, parishioners warming church interiors before winter masses. A feeling of reverent quiet among communities. Urban read these letters carefully. He understood that winter magnified both hope and uncertainty. The silence of the season made families more aware of absence, yet it also brought space for reflection and prayer. Urban believed that winter offered a special opportunity for deeper spiritual grounding. Urban's letters of encouragement, words traveling across cold distances. Urban continued writing letters during this season, knowing that written words carried warmth across distances. His letters became a kind of spiritual fire for communities seeking reassurance. They emphasized the value of patience, the importance of prayer, the dignity of steadfastness, the unity between travelers and those at home, the belief that sacrifice carried spiritual merit, the need for charity during harsh months. Priests often read these letters aloud during winter gatherings. People listened while wrapped in cloaks, holding lamps for light. The words brought comfort, helping families feel connected to the larger movement. Monasteries in winter, islands of warmth and prayer. During winter, monasteries played an even greater role in preserving calm. Their thick stone walls protected monks from cold winds. Fires burned through the day. Cloisters remained quiet, and chapels glowed faintly with candlelight. Urban relied on monasteries to sustain the spiritual rhythm of Europe. He encouraged abbots to open their gates to the poor, assist families lacking supplies, hold extended vigils for travelers, Support clergy through letters and hospitality. Host gatherings for people seeking comfort. Some monasteries even kept small fires burning in outdoor shelters so travelers or messengers could warm themselves before continuing their journey. Urban admired this steady charity. To him, monasteries were the warm hearts of Christendom during winter. Urban's continued governance, a papacy working quietly in cold months. Although much of Europe's attention centered on the travelers, Urban's responsibilities as Pope continued without interruption. He needed to oversee the appointment of bishops, the resolution of long-standing disputes, communication with rulers, decisions regarding church practices, review of reports from legates, planning for future councils, ongoing reform measures. Winter offered a kind of contemplative clarity. Travel slowed, giving Urban more time for reflection and careful decision-making. He worked quietly in well-lit rooms, often beside a fire, reading documents copied by scribes whose hands remained steady despite the cold. This was a season of deep thought rather than outward action. Reports from afar, news of travelers reaches Urban. As winter progressed, sparse reports arrived from regions where the earliest groups of pilgrims had traveled. Messengers described the challenges of foreign climates, moments of cooperation among travelers, local populations offering assistance, hardships encountered during long marches, struggles for food or shelter, victories of courage and perseverance. Urban listened with quiet seriousness. Each report informed his guidance. He wrote to legates urging them to reinforce discipline, to encourage patience, and to maintain peace. He knew that distant travels required spiritual strength as much as physical endurance. Urban support of families without travelers. Winter was especially difficult for families left behind. Households without fathers, sons, or brothers needed support from their communities. Urban encouraged clergy to pay close attention to these families, reminding them that charity toward them was holy work. Loneliness could be eased through community care. Winter burdens should be shared. Family should not feel abandoned. The Church valued their sacrifices. In some regions, clergy organized winter gatherings specifically for families of travelers, where people prayed together, shared stories, and supported one another. Urban believed that strengthening these families was essential to preserving peace. Urban's quiet understanding of fear. Even the most faithful families experienced fear during winter. The season itself symbolized uncertainty. Roads were blocked by snow. Conversations traveled slowly. No news came for long periods. The silence of winter often increased anxiety. Urban understood this fear, and he never dismissed it. His letters reflected a pastoral sensitivity. He wrote of trusting in divine presence, finding strength in community, resting in the rhythm of liturgy, believing that prayers reached travelers. The comfort offered by Christ during dark months. His gentle words helped many families endure moments of sorrow or worry. Urban and the nobility, maintaining order across Europe. During winter, many nobles remained at home rather than traveling. Their absence from the early waves of pilgrims meant they were responsible for maintaining order in their regions. Urban communicated with them frequently, encouraging peaceful governance, protection of those in need, support for the Church, avoidance of conflicts, fair administration of law, responsible management of lands. Urban believed that Europe's stability during winter depended heavily on the noble class acting with restraint and compassion. Urban's own winter routine, a life of discipline and reflection. Urban's winter days followed a gentle rhythm. He began mornings with prayer in a quiet chapel, perhaps warmed by a few small braziers. His afternoons often involved reading reports or writing letters. Evenings brought conversations with bishops or monks, or moments of silence spent reflecting on decisions made earlier. He walked occasionally in cloister gardens, even in cold weather. The bare branches and crisp air did not disturb him. They reminded him of simplicity and humility. Winter, for Urban, was a season of renewed focus. A sleep-friendly closing, Urban II standing beside a winter hearth. Imagine Pope Urban II standing beside a glowing hearth in a monastery chamber. Snow falls softly outside, settling peacefully on rooftops and cloister tiles. A single candle burns on the table beside him, illuminating parchment and quills. The fire crackles quietly, filling the room with gentle warmth. Urban watches the flames for a moment, thinking of travelers far from home, of families huddled near their own hearths, and of the silent, patient world waiting for spring. His breathing is calm. His thoughts are steady. The room feels sheltered from the cold, a sanctuary of warmth in a season of stillness. Let this peaceful image settle in your mind as Part 18 comes to a gentle close. Part 19. Urban II and the approaching spring of 1097, quiet anticipation, deep reflection, and the slow turning of Europe toward a new season. The winter of 1096 had been long. It had settled over Europe like a heavy wool cloak, softening sounds and slowing movement. Snow covered many of the great roads. Rivers froze thick enough to bear the weight of animals and carts. In many regions, villages gathered around warm hearths while the world outside rested in deep quiet. Yet within hearts and minds across Europe, something continued to stir. The movement that Pope Urban II had set gently into motion months earlier had not faded with the cold. Instead, it had rested quietly beneath the stillness of winter, gaining strength in ways that were difficult to see from the surface. By early 1097, as winter began slowly loosening its grip, the first signs of change appeared. Days grew slightly longer. The cold softened, even if just by a degree. Rivers began to thaw at their edges. Birds returned to the skies in small numbers. The promise of spring could be felt, though faintly. It was during this careful turning of the season that Urban entered one of the most contemplative periods of his papacy. Part 19 explores this gentle moment when Europe stood between seasons. It is a chapter of quiet anticipation, spiritual preparation, and urban steady reflection on the months that had passed. Allow this chapter to unfold at a slow pace, as if you are watching frost melt gradually from the windows of an ancient monastery. Settle comfortably. Breathe slowly. Let your mind drift into the soft rhythm of the story. The softening of winter, a world preparing to wake. As the first hints of spring reached Europe, communities began noticing subtle changes. Fields still lay barren, but the soil beneath the frost held the promise of future planting. Villagers began to mend tools. Shepherds checked fences in anticipation of grazing seasons. Families stepped outside more frequently. The scent of damp earth replaced the sharp winter air. Priests wrote to Urban describing thawing fields, the return of small gatherings outdoors, renewed conversations among families, the soft mood of hope that accompanied longer days, continued prayers for travelers far away. Urban read these letters with quiet appreciation. He sensed that the emotional landscape of Europe was shifting, just as the physical world was changing. Winter had been a time of reflection and stillness. Spring would be a time of renewed movement. Urban's long reflection, looking back on a transformative year. During the late winter months, Urban devoted many evenings to reflection. He had experienced one of the most transformative years of his life. In the months following the Council of Clermont, he had watched a spiritual movement rise from a single sermon to a continental phenomenon. As he looked back, he observed the following realities. Countless pilgrims had departed. Families had shown extraordinary faith. Clergy had embraced new responsibilities. Monasteries had become guardians of charity. Nobles had worked to maintain peace. Legates had traveled widely across Europe. The Church had grown stronger through unity. Urban reflected on both the successes and the challenges. He remembered moments of disorder among early groups, letters describing hardships, and concerns from communities under strain. Yet he remained calm. He believed that the spiritual foundation of the movement was solid. Reflection strengthened his resolve. It reminded him that large undertakings required patience, compassion, and trust in divine timing. Growing anticipation, news of travelers awakens Europe's curiosity. As winter approached its end, occasional messages arrived from distant territories where early waves of pilgrims now journeyed. These reports were fragmented and traveled slowly, but they carried glimpses of distant landscapes, unfamiliar customs, and the challenges facing the travelers. Communities heard stories of harsh conditions in foreign lands, cooperation among diverse travelers, guidance provided by clergy, struggles to secure food, encounters with new cultures, occasional conflicts along the way, moments of remarkable resilience. Urban received these reports with deep interest. Although he could not shape events directly in distant regions, he continued providing guidance through letters. He encouraged legates to maintain unity among groups, to emphasize spiritual purpose, and to encourage patience. To Urban, the eastward movement had become more than a pilgrimage. It was a test of Europe's spiritual maturity. Urban's pastoral focus on families during late winter. Even as spring approached, the absence of travelers remained deeply felt in many communities. Winter had magnified this sense of longing. Spring, however, renewed the emotional weight for some families. They felt both hope and uncertainty as the world around them began to change. Urban's letters offered comfort, reminding families that their sacrifices were honored by God. Patience was a form of spiritual strength. Prayer remained a lifeline between loved ones. Communities should support one another. The changing season symbolized renewal and divine protection. Urban viewed families as essential contributors to the broader movement. Their faith preserved peace and stability within Europe. Urban's efforts to maintain peace among nobles. As the snow melted and roads reopened, nobles began traveling once again. Urban recognized the risks associated with renewed mobility. Political disputes could easily reignite. Land conflicts long set aside during winter might return. To prevent instability, Urban wrote to secular rulers and noble families reminding them that violence at home weakened spiritual unity. Disputes should be settled through mediation. The poor required protection during early spring. Local peace was as important as distant missions. Cooperation between noble houses reflected spiritual maturity. Urban's calm words often soothed tensions before they grew into conflict. His steady leadership helped preserve regional order during a potentially delicate transition. Urban's continued attention to church reform. Although Europe's eyes had turned toward the east, Urban refused to let reform fall away. Even during late winter and early spring, he continued reinforcing his early policies, including ensuring honest selection of bishops, protecting clerical independence, strengthening monastic discipline, resisting secular pressure on church decisions, encouraging pastoral care among parish priests. Urban believed that reform was the foundation upon which Europe's spiritual health rested. Without strong internal discipline, the external movement would falter. His ability to sustain reform even during periods of great distraction demonstrated his consistency as a leader. The role of monasteries as Europe prepared for spring. Monasteries continued to offer stability during this transitional season. As the cold lifted, monks resumed outdoor work, caring for their gardens, repairing walls, or preparing for upcoming planting. They remained important sources of charity, spiritual instruction, safe lodging, administrative support for the church, moral guidance for communities. Urban valued monasteries as spiritual anchors. Their consistent rhythms of prayer and labor created a sense of constancy that balanced the uncertainty created by the traveler's absence. Urban's awareness of the coming stages of the movement. Urban understood that early 1097 represented only the beginning of a long series of developments. More organized military forces, led by Europe's nobles, were preparing to depart. Their departure would create new shifts in Europe's balance. Urban anticipated greater need for communication, increased reliance on legates, additional emotional strain on families, new responsibilities for clergy, greater movement across Europe's roads, stronger coordination with rulers. He prepared quietly for these changes, meeting with advisors, reviewing reports, and drafting letters that would guide the next phase of the journey. Urban approached this coming stage not with fear, but with thoughtful readiness. A sleep-friendly closing, Urban II at the edge of a thawing forest. Imagine Pope Urban II walking along a quiet forest path beside a monastery as winter begins to fade. Snow still clings to the shaded roots of tall trees, yet patches of dark earth appear beneath thawing drifts. Water drips softly from branches. A thin mist rises from the ground as the warmth of the sun touches the cold soil. Small birds call from the treetops, testing the returning season. Urban pauses for a moment in the cool air. He breathes deeply, sensing the change in the world around him. Behind him, the monastery bells ring gently, echoing through the woods. Ahead of him lies a world preparing to wake, a world that will need his steady guidance as new challenges arise. He stands quietly, watching sunlight filter through bare branches, grateful for the stillness of the moment. Let this peaceful image guide you softly toward rest as Part 19 comes to a gentle close. Part 20. Urban II and the Dawn of 1097. A pope looking forward, a Europe in motion, and the quiet birth of a lasting legacy. As the early months of 1097 unfolded, the world around Pope Urban II began to change more quickly. Winter had receded at last. Spring light filtered through new leaves, painting the courtyards of monasteries with soft, shifting patterns. Roads once blocked by snow opened again to foot traffic. Rivers thawed and flowed steadily toward the seas. Fields across Europe stirred with renewed life as families prepared for planting. The sound of distant bells carried farther on the warmer air. This was a season of beginnings. It was also a moment of transition for the movement that Urban had nurtured from a single sermon into a vast, continent-wide pilgrimage. Many travelers were already far away, journeying through unfamiliar territories. Others were gathering in great numbers with organized leaders who had spent months preparing. The movement as a whole was shifting from spontaneous waves into coordinated efforts. Part 20 brings this long and gentle story to a peaceful close. It explores Urban's final reflections at the threshold of a new chapter in European history. It examines his quiet understanding of the moment's significance, his thoughts on the past, and his hopes for the future. Allow each section to unfold slowly, like spring sunlight spreading across a quiet cloister floor. Settle comfortably, breathe deeply, and let your mind drift into this final calming chapter. The first great assemblies, Europe awakens to coordinated movement. As spring arrived, Europe witnessed the gathering of new groups preparing to travel east. These were not the spontaneous bands of the previous summer. They were organized communities of nobles, knights, clergy, and followers who moved with purpose and preparation. Urban received reports describing large processions forming around fortified towns, priests blessing banners in peaceful ceremonies, nobles coordinating supplies, families gathering to say long farewells. Calm, prayerful vigils held the night before departures. Roads filled slowly with disciplined travelers. Urban sensed that a new stage had begun. The early waves had carried the raw spiritual emotion of his call. The new waves carried structure and intention. Together, they represented complementary elements of a single movement. Urban's reflections on leadership, responsibility, and providence. Urban spent many evenings reflecting on the months that had passed. He had guided the church through seasons of intense preparation, emotional strain, and widespread change. He had written countless letters, blessed travelers, and steadied communities. He understood that his role was shifting again. During this period of reflection, Urban asked himself quietly, had he provided enough guidance? Had he supported the poor faithfully? Had he sustained unity within the church? Had he maintained peaceful dialogue with rulers? Had he preserved the spiritual essence of the movement? Had he placed everything in God's hands when required? These reflections did not trouble him. Instead, they brought a gentle clarity. He trusted that he had done what was asked of him. He believed deeply that his intentions had been guided by spiritual purpose. Urban sensed that the movement's future lay not in his hands alone but in the hearts of those who traveled, prayed, and hoped. Urban and the renewed duties of spring. Spring brought new responsibilities. Urban resumed travel across regions where his presence could encourage unity. He met with bishops, abbots, and nobles, offering calm guidance. He blessed groups preparing to depart. He held councils to clarify doctrine and address disputes. He strengthened the reforms that had shaped his papacy from the beginning. In each place he visited, Urban sought to provide reassurance, clarity, compassion, spiritual encouragement, practical advice, blessings for renewed labor. He moved with a quiet grace that felt appropriate for the season. Spring, to Urban, represented both continuity and renewal. The church's work never truly paused. Instead, it cycled gently with the rhythms of the year. Urban's growing awareness of his legacy. By 1097, Urban sensed that the world had changed in ways that would outlast him. Whether or not he lived to see the movement's outcomes, he understood that he had shaped its direction during a crucial moment in history. His legacy, he realized, was not rooted in military decisions, political negotiations, territorial ambitions. Instead, his legacy rested on spiritual renewal, unity across regions, reform within the church, compassion for the poor, courage to inspire collective action, the quiet strengthening of faith across Europe. Urban did not view this with pride. He saw it as a reflection of divine will working through him. This understanding brought him peace. Europe's emotional landscape in early spring. Communities experienced a mixture of emotions as spring progressed. The warming weather brought a sense of hope. Fields required tending again, giving families purposeful work. Markets grew livelier. Bells rang more often. Yet the absence of travelers remained deeply felt, especially during festivities or gatherings. Urban received letters describing prayers offered for those far from home, candles lit during evening vigils, children asking when their fathers would return, elderly family members seeking comfort from clergy, shared meals hosted for those feeling lonely, renewed charity within villages. Urban's responses were gentle and pastoral. He encouraged families to maintain routines, to care for one another, and to place trust in God's timing. Urban's vision of the church during this turning point. Urban saw the church as a guiding lamp during this transitional season. He believed it must remain steady, humble, attentive, charitable, united, firm in doctrine, gentle in practice. To him, the church's role was not to direct earthly movements through rigid commands, but to hold a spiritual space for all people, near and far. His efforts in these months reflected that vision. He encouraged clergy to continue offering sacraments, teaching with clarity, visiting the sick, and supporting the poor. He reminded monasteries of their roles as sanctuaries of peace. He urged bishops to mediate disputes with patience. Urban believed that the Church's calm presence was essential to sustaining Europe's heartbeat. The quiet of evening, Urban's contemplative moments. Urban often walked alone in monastery cloisters during the early evenings of spring. The air was cool but no longer harsh. Birds sang softly from nearby trees. The sky grew pale lavender before fading into deeper blue. Lamps flickered along the inner walkways, casting gentle light across stone floors. During these moments, Urban would think of travelers sleeping beneath foreign stars, families praying in their homes, monks chanting in distant abbeys, the unbroken rhythm of the liturgy, the slow unfolding of divine purpose. These quiet contemplations nourished him. They reminded him that leadership required stillness as much as action. Urban's calm acceptance of what lay beyond his sight. Urban understood that he could not see everything. The movement he had inspired stretched across continents. Many travelers were far beyond the reach of direct communication. Their experiences were shaped by landscapes and cultures Urban had never visited. Yet he accepted this with serenity. He believed that God walked with each traveler. Communities at home held spiritual roles of their own. The church remained united in purpose. The story unfolding in distant lands was guided by forces greater than human planning. Urban trusted in the unseen. This trust gave him strength. A sleep-friendly closing. Urban II in a sunlit cloister as spring fully arrives. Imagine Pope Urban II standing in the center of a quiet cloister courtyard on a warm spring morning. The sky above him is clear. The sunlight is gentle, brightening the stone walls with a soft golden glow. The sound of running water trickles from a small fountain. Birds move among the trees, calling peacefully. A breeze carries the scent of new blossoms. Urban stands with his hands clasped loosely before him. His breathing is calm. His mind is centered. He feels the warmth of the season settling into the stones beneath his feet. He thinks of all the paths before him and all the paths behind him. He senses the balance between what he has done and what will unfold beyond his sight. He whispers a prayer for peace, for unity, for protection, and for the gentle resilience of the people he serves. The quiet world around him seems to hold the prayer in its embrace. Let this peaceful image drift softly through your thoughts as this 20-part series comes to its gentle close. As we come to the end of this quiet journey through the life and legacy of Pope Urban II, let your thoughts settle like soft dust on the stone floors of an ancient cloister. We walked through seasons of reflection, calm determination, and steady leadership, watching a world shift gently around a man shaped by faith and patience. Thank you for letting these stories guide you into rest and accompany you through peaceful moments of the night. Until our next step into the past, sleep well, breathe deeply, and let history fade into dream. Background historian out.